Ever wondered what makes Rick Sanchez more than just a drunk genius? Behind his cynical exterior and catchphrases lies one of television's most complex characters, a man tortured by his own brilliance and haunted by mistakes across infinite timelines. Over the next 2.5 hours, we'll explore the moments where Rick's carefully constructed walls come crashing down. From his attempted suicide after Unity leaves him to the rare moments he shows genuine love for Morty, we'll uncover what makes the smartest man in the multiverse perhaps also the loneliest. Wubba Luba Dub Dub. It's the catchphrase we all associate with the dimension-hopping scientist, a seemingly nonsensical expression of enthusiasm that masks a deeper truth. In bird person's language, it actually means, "I am in great pain, please help me." This linguistic sleight of hand perfectly encapsulates the character of Rick Sanchez, a man whose outward cynicism serves as elaborate camouflage for profound emotional wounds. Those first few episodes of Rick and Morty present us with a straightforward reading of Rick. He's a brilliant, callous alcoholic who views the universe as meaningless and relationships as burdens. His constant belching, casual disregard for others, and nihilistic commentary seem to tell us everything we need to know about this character. But as we watch more closely, this initial impression begins to crack. Rick's cynicism isn't just a personality trait. It's a sophisticated defense mechanism, constructed with the same meticulous care as his most complex inventions. We see glimpses of this truth in early episodes when his guard momentarily slips. Consider how he reacts when Morty is in genuine danger. The panic that briefly flashes across his face before being quickly suppressed and replaced with a calculated quip about how replaceable Morty is. These microsecond breaks in character reveal something Rick works desperately to conceal. Rick's dismissive catchphrases function as verbal shields. His constant assertions that nothing matters and everyone is just a collection of particles aren't casual observations but active mantras, statements he needs to repeat to reinforce his emotional barriers. When Rick declares that love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed, he's not simply sharing scientific wisdom. He's actively constructing a worldview that protects him from vulnerability. It's telling that these nihilistic pronouncements often come after moments where Rick has shown accidental care or concern, as though he needs to course-correct back to emotional detachment. What's particularly fascinating is how Rick maintains this cynical persona, even when completely alone. In moments where no one is watching, like when he's working in his garage at night or flying solo in his ship, the mask rarely slips. This suggests his defense mechanism has become so ingrained that he performs it even for himself. The cynicism has calcified into his identity, a shell so thick that Rick himself may no longer clearly recognize the boundary between his authentic self and the persona he's constructed. This performance without an audience reveals just how deep his emotional wounds must run. They're so painful that Rick can't risk confronting them even in private moments. Science itself becomes a tool in Rick's emotional arsenal. His hyper-rational approach to the universe allows him to reduce everything, including emotions and relationships, to mechanical processes that can be analyzed, manipulated, and ultimately dismissed. When faced with emotional situations, Rick immediately retreats to scientific explanations or technological solutions, creating literal physical distance between himself and his feelings. His constant emphasis on his superior intellect serves a dual purpose. It elevates him above others while simultaneously justifying his emotional detachment as a logical conclusion reached by a superior mind. The multiverse theory becomes Rick's ultimate escape route. If infinite timelines exist with infinite variations of every person and event, then nothing in any particular timeline can truly matter. Attachments become illogical when you can simply hop to another reality where your daughter is still alive or your friend never betrayed you. Yet Rick's behavior contradicts this philosophy. Despite having access to infinite families across infinite realities, he consistently returns to the same Morty and the same Smith family. His actions reveal the lie in his words. These specific people do matter to him, despite his endless protestations to the contrary. What's particularly revealing are moments where Rick seems to be trying to convince himself as much as others of his nihilistic worldview. Watch his eyes when he delivers his most cynical lines. There's often a flicker of uncertainty, a slight hesitation that suggests he's reasserting something he needs to believe rather than something he knows to be true. These moments happen most frequently after close calls or emotional vulnerabilities. When Morty expresses affection or Beth seeks his approval, Rick's subsequent nihilistic pronouncements feel more desperate, more forced, as though he's frantically rebuilding walls that were momentarily breached. We have to wonder what catastrophic events could have shaped a mind capable of comprehending the universe's infinite complexity into one so afraid of emotional connection. What could break a man of Rick's extraordinary capabilities so thoroughly that he would construct such elaborate defenses? The fragments we see throughout the series, brief memories of a wife named Diane, allusions to a past rebellion, traumatic separations, suggest profound loss. Rick didn't arrive at his cynicism through philosophical contemplation, but through traumatic experience. Heartbreak so severe that he engineered an entire persona to ensure he would never be hurt that way again. The tragedy of Rick Sanchez lies in what his cynical armor costs him. In protecting himself from pain, he also walls himself off from joy, connection, and meaning. His defense mechanism keeps him safe but alone, a condition he medicates with alcohol, adventures, and fleeting pleasures that never satisfy the hunger for genuine connection that he refuses to acknowledge. The most profound irony is that the very intelligence that allows Rick to create such sophisticated emotional armor also prevents him from fully believing in its necessity. He's smart enough to see through his own deception, but too wounded to dismantle it. All of Rick's sophisticated emotional armor collapsed in the aftermath of Unity's departure. The episode, Autoerotic Assimilation, shows us something rare and terrifying. What happens when the smartest man in the universe can no longer outsmart his own pain? This single episode might reveal more about Rick Sanchez than any other moment in the series, exposing vulnerabilities that his typical cynical facade works over time to conceal. Unity wasn't just another conquest or fleeting relationship for Rick. This hive mind entity represented something uniquely important to him, perhaps the only being in the universe complex enough to fully understand him. Unlike humans who could only grasp fragments of Rick's vast intellect, Unity could comprehend him in totality. The relationship offered Rick something he rarely experiences: being fully known without feeling isolated by his intelligence. When you're the smartest person in every room, genuine connection becomes nearly impossible. But Unity's collective consciousness could meet Rick at his level. What makes Unity's departure so devastating is the goodbye letter it leaves behind. This isn't just any breakup note. It's a direct confrontation with Rick's fundamental character flaws from perhaps the only entity capable of seeing them completely. The letter functions as a mirror, reflecting back at Rick everything he tries so hard to ignore about himself. Unity essentially tells Rick that despite its ability to assimilate and control entire civilizations, it cannot maintain control of itself when around him. This brutal assessment strikes at Rick's core wound: the idea that his very nature corrupts and drives away those who get close to him. Immediately after discovering Unity's departure, we witness Rick's instinctive coping mechanism kick in. He puts on a facade of nonchalance, pretending that this is just another adventure gone sideways. "Their loss," he mutters, as if trying to convince himself that this rejection is meaningless in the infinite cosmos. But this thin veneer quickly crumbles once he returns home alone. The contrast between his public and private reactions underscores how much emotional labor Rick invests in maintaining his indifferent persona, and how quickly that persona disintegrates when no audience remains to perform for. What follows is one of the most chilling sequences in the series. With cold scientific precision, Rick methodically begins assembling what we soon realize is a death machine. There's something uniquely disturbing about watching Rick apply his genius, typically used for interdimensional travel or outlandish inventions, toward the singular purpose of ending his own existence. The scene unfolds with clinical detachment, as if Rick has emotionally removed himself from the process entirely, treating his planned suicide as just another experiment. He carefully positions an alien creature above a vat, sets up a device to instantly kill it painlessly, and programs the sequence to vaporize himself immediately after. The contrast between this scientific precision and the raw emotional devastation driving it creates the episode's most powerful tension. Rick approaches his own potential death with the same analytical mind he applies to everything else. processing his unbearable emotional pain through the only framework he truly trusts: scientific methodology. This juxtaposition reveals that Rick's scientific detachment isn't just a personality trait, it's his primary tool for processing emotions too overwhelming to face directly. Perhaps the most revealing detail comes in the timing of what happens next. Just before the death machine activates, Rick collapses, passing out from his extreme intoxication. This moment of unconsciousness interrupts his carefully orchestrated exit, suggesting something profound. Even as his conscious mind seeks oblivion, some deeper part of Rick resists complete self-destruction. His collapse before completing the suicide attempt hints at an internal struggle between the part of Rick that can no longer bear existence and another part that, despite everything, still clings to it. The scene leaves us wondering if this unconsciousness was purely accidental, or if, on some level, Rick sabotaged his own plan. This breaking point connects directly to Rick's established pattern of using substances to numb his feelings. Throughout the series, we see Rick constantly drinking, but this episode contextualizes his alcoholism, not as casual hedonism, but as desperate self-medication. The suicide attempt sequence shows the ultimate extension of this coping mechanism. When alcohol alone proves insufficient to dull the pain, Rick turns to the permanent escape of non-existence. His substance abuse isn't just a character quirk. It's a consistent strategy to avoid confronting emotions that his cynical worldview provides no framework to process. The Unity breakup scene ultimately reveals Rick's deepest, most primal fear: that his intelligence, the very quality that makes him exceptional, simultaneously makes him fundamentally unlovable and doomed to isolation. Unity, the only being potentially complex enough to love him completely, ultimately couldn't sustain that connection. The episode suggests a devastating possibility: that Rick's genius traps him in a paradox, where he's too intelligent to believe in the comforting lies that make existence bearable for others, yet still human enough to crave the connection those lies facilitate. This moment of vulnerability creates a profound shift in how we understand Rick. Behind his nihilistic pronouncements and scientific reduction of emotions to chemical reactions lies a being capable of devastating heartbreak. His cynicism isn't just philosophical posturing. It's a necessary shield against the unbearable awareness that his very nature may condemn him to perpetual loneliness. The most brilliant mind in the multiverse can create portals between dimensions, but cannot bridge the gap between himself and others. For a man who claims attachment is a weakness, Rick's relationship with Morty presents the most fascinating contradiction in his character. Their dynamic begins with cold calculation, Rick openly using his grandson as nothing more than a human shield. "Your brainwaves act as camouflage," Rick explains in early episodes, establishing the purely functional nature of their adventures together. This isn't merely metaphorical. Rick literally brings Morty along because his brainwaves mask Rick's genius from detection by his numerous enemies. It's transactional in the most clinical sense, with Rick showing little immediate concern when Morty finds himself in life-threatening situations. The imbalance of power between them is stark in these early adventures. Rick consistently prioritizes his scientific pursuits and personal gain over Morty's safety. When Morty expresses fear or discomfort, Rick dismisses these concerns with casual cruelty, reminding his grandson of his intellectual superiority and Morty's relative worthlessness in the grand schemes of the multiverse. This manipulation establishes a relationship foundation built on exploitation rather than affection. Yet beneath this callous exterior, something unexpected begins to emerge. In subtle moments scattered throughout early seasons, Rick occasionally reveals flashes of genuine concern for Morty that can't be explained away by self-interest. These inconsistencies in Rick's behavior create the first cracks in his carefully constructed facade of indifference. When Morty is in genuine danger, Rick's reaction sometimes betrays an emotional investment that contradicts his stated philosophy about the meaninglessness of all connections. What makes this evolution so compelling is that it's never explicitly acknowledged within the show. Instead, it emerges through a series of small behavioral shifts that accumulate across episodes. Rick's Morty waves explanation initially serves as the perfect scientific rationalization for their partnership. It gives Rick a logical reason to keep Morty close without admitting any emotional attachment. This explanation allows Rick to maintain his self-image as someone unburdened by sentimental connections while still keeping his grandson by his side. The transformation becomes more evident when Rick begins putting himself in harm's way to protect Morty. In moments of immediate danger, Rick's instinctive reactions tell a different story than his cynical pronouncements. He throws himself between Morty and threats, devises complex plans to ensure Morty's safety, and occasionally even admits his own mistakes when they put Morty at risk. These actions directly contradict his selfish persona and hint at a protective instinct that Rick himself seems reluctant to acknowledge. As seasons progress, we witness Rick becoming increasingly invested in Morty's development. His protection shifts from the bare minimum needed to keep a useful tool, functioning to a more comprehensive concern for Morty's well-being and growth. This shift isn't dramatic or announced with fanfare. It emerges through small moments where Rick chooses Morty's interests over his own immediate desires. The incremental nature of this change makes it all the more believable within the context of Rick's character. Perhaps most telling are the rare moments when Rick expresses pride in Morty's accomplishments. These instances are particularly significant because they serve no practical purpose for Rick himself. When Morty successfully navigates a challenge or displays unexpected courage, Rick's approval isn't just about recognizing a tool functioning well, it reveals a genuine investment in Morty's personal development. These moments of pride suggest Rick values Morty as an individual with potential rather than merely as an extension of his own plans. The relationship reaches its most complex dimension when Morty begins asserting his independence. Rick's reactions to these assertions of autonomy are particularly revealing. Rather than simply finding a more compliant replacement, which would be entirely possible in a multiverse of infinite Mortys, Rick becomes visibly unsettled when Morty challenges his authority or makes independent choices. These moments of tension expose Rick's emotional vulnerability. Morty's growing independence threatens not just Rick's control, but his emotional stability. This threat to Rick's stability reveals perhaps the most surprising truth about their relationship. Rick has become dependent on Morty in ways that transcend utility. Morty's growth forces Rick to confront his own reliance on their bond, which is perhaps the clearest sign of genuine attachment. For someone who prizes self-sufficiency and dismisses emotional connections as weaknesses, this dependence represents a profound contradiction in Rick's character. The parallel between Rick's treatment of Morty and his relationship with his daughter Beth adds another layer of complexity. The show hints that Rick's approach to family connections may be influenced by his experiences as a father, experiences that were clearly traumatic enough to shape his current difficulties with attachment. There's a suggestion that in his relationship with Morty, Rick is working through his own failures and regrets regarding Beth, creating a multi-generational pattern of damage and tentative healing. What makes this gradual transformation so powerful is that it directly contradicts Rick's explicit philosophy. While continuing to claim that all connections are meaningless chemical reactions, Rick's behavior increasingly suggests that his bond with Morty has become the closest thing to love. This broken scientist allows himself to experience. This contradiction isn't portrayed as hypocrisy, but rather as the profound struggle of a damaged person attempting to reconcile his intellectual convictions with his emotional needs. The profound struggle between Rick's intellectual convictions and emotional needs reveals an even darker pattern at work. Despite his infinite capabilities, Rick systematically dismantles every moment of potential contentment before it can take root. It's as if the smartest man in the universe operates on a deeply ingrained program of self-destruction, one that activates precisely when happiness appears within his grasp. This pattern of self-sabotage manifests most clearly in how Rick consistently pushes away those who demonstrate genuine care for him. In the Season 5 finale, just as Rick's relationship with his family begins to stabilize, he deliberately isolates himself from them, including Morty, in pursuit of revenge against Rick Prime. The contradiction is striking. He risks his life to protect his family countless times, yet deliberately creates emotional distance the moment connection feels too real. This isn't simply hypocrisy, but rather a defense mechanism against the vulnerability that comes with attachment. What makes this behavior particularly fascinating is that it often seems unconscious. Rick frequently appears surprised by the consequences of his actions, suggesting that his self-destruction operates on an almost involuntary level. When stable situations emerge, Rick creates chaos, not because stability bores him, but because it threatens the emotional walls he's built. Happiness becomes a potential threat to the identity he's constructed, one based on cynicism and emotional detachment. The Planetina storyline offers an unexpected window into this pattern through Morty's experience. When Morty finds a meaningful connection with the superhero Planetina, he experiences a brief period of joy and belonging. Yet the relationship crumbles due to fundamental incompatibilities, leading to profound heartbreak. While Rick isn't directly responsible, this episode subtly mirrors his own relationship patterns. Just like Rick, Morty experiences how quickly meaningful connections can dissolve, reinforcing the worldview that happiness is fleeting and perhaps not worth pursuing. Rick's scientific brilliance, rather than helping him process emotions, often becomes his primary tool for avoiding them altogether. Instead of addressing the underlying pain driving his behavior, he channels his genius into external problems and distractions. His alcoholism functions as both escape and self-medication, numbing the awareness that his actions continually undermine his own well-being. When confronted with emotional challenges, Rick consistently chooses scientific solutions over emotional processing, creating a cycle where pain is temporarily masked rather than healed. The episode Analyze Piss provides particularly illuminating insight into Rick's struggle with purpose and self-worth. When Jerry unexpectedly becomes a superhero, Rick faces the emptiness of his existence and lack of purpose. The episode's most revealing moment comes when Rick encounters Pissmaster after a suicide attempt. This scene mirrors Rick's own suicidal episode after Unity's departure, but from the observer's perspective. Through helping Pissmaster, Rick confronts his own destructive tendencies indirectly, revealing his deep longing for validation and meaning, despite his actions that consistently sabotage these very things. Rick's self-destruction extends beyond his personal relationships into his broader life choices. He consistently creates situations where failure becomes inevitable, setting impossibly high stakes or making decisions guaranteed to produce negative outcomes. This behavior suggests that Rick, on some level, believes he deserves punishment rather than happiness. His intelligence allows him to predict these outcomes, yet he proceeds anyway, revealing that self-sabotage isn't merely incidental but potentially intentional. The fear driving Rick's self-sabotage becomes clearer in Fear No Mort, which reveals that Morty's greatest fear is being replaced in Rick's life. This fear manifests in Morty's subconscious as a reconnection between Rick and Diane, suggesting that Rick's abandonment is what Morty fears most, while simultaneously hinting that reconciliation with his past might be what Rick himself secretly desires. The episode indicates that Rick's fear of vulnerability drives his self-destructive behavior as he creates distance to avoid confronting the possibility of genuine connection. In a multiverse of infinite possibilities, Rick's self-sabotage takes on an even more tragic dimension. With limitless options available, Rick consistently chooses paths that lead to isolation and pain. This pattern suggests something profound about Rick's perception of himself. That despite having access to literally anything he could want, he doesn't believe he deserves happiness. His scientific worldview offers the perfect rationalization. If nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, then why not destroy your own happiness? After all, it's meaningless anyway. The true tragedy of Rick's self-sabotage is that it operates in direct opposition to what he actually wants. Episodes consistently show that beneath his cynical exterior, Rick deeply craves connection, acceptance, and love. Yet the moment these things appear within reach, his self-destructive programming activates, pushing away the very things he needs most. His intelligence becomes a curse rather than a blessing, allowing him to construct elaborate justifications for behavior that ultimately harms himself more than anyone else. What makes this pattern particularly sad is that Rick seems aware of it on some level. There are moments throughout the series where Rick displays brief flashes of self-awareness about his destructive tendencies, yet seems powerless to change them. His continued use of science and substances to avoid emotional processing suggests that confronting the root causes of his behavior remains too painful to face directly. Instead, Rick remains locked in cycles of momentary happiness followed by self-induced catastrophe. Perhaps the most compelling explanation for Rick's self-sabotage isn't that he's simply destructive by nature, but that he fundamentally believes himself unworthy of love. His fear of vulnerability stems from a deep-seated conviction that anyone who truly knows him will inevitably reject him, a belief potentially rooted in whatever traumatic events led to the loss of his original family. Rather than face this possibility, Rick preemptively destroys relationships, controlling the narrative and timing of their inevitable end. The fragments of Rick's history reveal a man shaped not just by scientific brilliance, but by devastating personal tragedy. What we know about Rick C-137's past comes to us in scattered, often contradictory glimpses, like pieces of a puzzle intentionally kept incomplete. This intentional ambiguity serves a narrative purpose. It challenges us to question whether Rick himself can fully distinguish between his authentic memories and the versions he's constructed to survive his pain. The most revealing window into Rick's past appears during the Shoney's mind interrogation in The Rickshank Redemption. These brief, fragmented memories might seem simple, but they carry tremendous emotional weight. We witness what appears to be Rick's wife Diane and young daughter Beth, moments of domestic happiness shattered by violence. But these glimpses raise more questions than answers. Are these genuine memories, fabrications to mislead his captors, or perhaps a blend of truth and fiction that Rick himself can no longer separate? What makes Rick's backstory particularly devastating is what we learn about Rick Prime, the Rick responsible for killing Rick C-137's family. The revelation that Rick Prime didn't just kill Diane, but actually erased her from every universe with the Omega device adds a layer of profound, irreversible loss to Rick's character. This isn't just the death of loved ones, it's their complete erasure from existence across infinite realities, leaving Rick with no possibility of finding another version of his wife. This cosmic-scale tragedy helps explain why Rick, despite having access to infinite realities, still carries such unresolved grief. The show's creators maintain a deliberate mystery around these events, feeding us small, often contradictory details that force us to actively engage with Rick's history. This approach mirrors Rick's own relationship with his past, fractured, unreliable, and carefully guarded. The limited concrete information we receive is presented in ways that challenge our perception of truth, encouraging us to question not just what happened, but how these events fundamentally altered who Rick became. An unexpected insight into Rick's past comes through the character of Simple Rick in the Citadel of Ricks. Simple Rick's manufactured memories of a happy life with his daughter reveal something profound about all Ricks. Beneath their cynical exteriors lies a universal longing for connection and meaning. The Simple Rick commercials showcase a fabricated past that serves as a coping mechanism for unbearable grief, highlighting the universal need for belonging and the lengths to which individuals will go to find it, even if only through false realities. It suggests that before tragedy struck, Rick C-137 was capable of genuine love and happiness, qualities he now struggles to reclaim. The mystery surrounding Rick's original Beth and Diane is central to understanding his character. We know that their loss serves as the catalyst for his nihilistic worldview and explains many of his self-destructive behaviors. But this loss isn't just backstory. It's the active wound that continues to shape every decision Rick makes. His refusal to form lasting attachments, his compulsive need to maintain control, his substance abuse, all can be traced back to this foundational trauma. The permanent erasure of Diane from every universe explains why Rick, despite having infinite realities to choose from, remains so fundamentally broken. This loss also explains Rick's complicated relationship with the Beth we know throughout the series. His absence during her childhood wasn't simply abandonment. It was the result of his quest for vengeance against Rick Prime. Yet his return to her life carries its own complexity. Is he seeking redemption for failing to protect his original daughter? Is Beth a replacement for what he lost? Or is his connection to her genuine? These questions reveal how Rick's past continues to haunt his present relationships, creating patterns of attachment and avoidance that he himself may not fully understand. The traumatic events in Rick's history didn't just shape his personal relationships, they altered his entire worldview. His nihilism isn't merely a philosophical position, it's a defense mechanism against unbearable grief. By insisting that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, Rick attempts to numb himself to the pain of his loss. But this coping mechanism comes at a terrible cost, preventing him from forming meaningful connections and trapping him in cycles of self-destruction. The smartest man in the multiverse can't figure out how to process his grief, except by denying that anything, including grief itself, has meaning. This understanding of Rick's past helps explain one of the show's central paradoxes: why a man who claims to believe nothing matters consistently acts in ways that suggest the opposite. His protective behavior toward Morty, his repeated returns to the Smith family, his rare but significant moments of vulnerability, all contradict his stated nihilism. These contradictions aren't plot inconsistencies, but rather evidence of Rick's internal struggle between the defensive worldview he's adopted and the emotional needs he can't fully suppress. What makes Rick's character so compelling is that his intelligence, the very quality that defines him, offers no solution to his emotional wounds. He can build portals to infinite dimensions, create life, and bend reality to his will, yet he cannot escape the pain of his past. In fact, his genius may even exacerbate his suffering, giving him the tools to avoid confronting his grief through increasingly elaborate distractions and escapes. The tragedy of Rick lies in this fundamental irony. The smartest man in the multiverse cannot outsmart his own pain. For all his claims about the meaninglessness of existence, there's one relationship that consistently contradicts Rick's nihilistic facade. His friendship with Bird Person stands as perhaps the most enduring connection in Rick's chaotic life, offering a rare window into what Rick values beyond scientific curiosity and selfish pursuits. While Rick constructs elaborate defenses against emotional attachment, his actions toward this stoic alien reveal a capacity for loyalty that he desperately tries to deny. When we first meet Bird Person at Rick's house party, he initially seems like just another bizarre alien acquaintance. Yet the way Rick speaks to him carries a different quality, a respect rarely shown to others. Their friendship wasn't formed in random adventures or drinking escapades, but through a shared history of rebellion against the Galactic Federation. These weren't casual encounters, but life-or-death scenarios where they fought side by side for a cause they both believed in. This revolutionary past gives their relationship a depth that Rick's other connections often lack, grounded in mutual understanding and shared purpose rather than convenience. The wedding of Bird Person and Tammy provides one of the series' most revealing moments about Rick's true feelings. When the ceremony is revealed as a trap and Bird Person is gunned down, Rick's reaction goes beyond the irritation he typically displays when plans go awry. His visible anguish and immediate attempt to reach his friend amid gunfire demonstrates genuine emotional distress. For someone who claims that attachments are meaningless in an infinite multiverse, Rick's behavior suggests that Bird Person isn't replaceable to him, even if alternate versions might exist elsewhere. What makes Bird Person particularly significant in Rick's life is how their relationship contrasts with Rick's typical patterns. While Rick manipulates almost everyone around him, his interactions with Bird Person contain a rare honesty. Bird Person's straightforward nature doesn't allow for Rick's usual deceptions and deflections. When Bird Person bluntly states uncomfortable truths, Rick doesn't respond with his typical mockery or dismissal. Instead, these moments often leave Rick uncharacteristically silent, as if acknowledging the weight of his friend's perspective. Even more telling is Rick's response to Bird Person's apparent death. After Tammy's betrayal, Rick doesn't simply locate another Bird Person from an alternate dimension, a solution that would align with his stated philosophy about the interchangeability of people in an infinite multiverse. Instead, he goes to extraordinary lengths to resurrect the specific Bird Person he knew, eventually entering his friend's mind in Richtermal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort to help restore his consciousness. This effort contradicts Rick's usual move-on attitude and suggests that to Rick, this particular relationship can't simply be replaced. Inside Bird Person's mind, we witness one of Rick's most vulnerable moments. The mental conversation between them reveals layers of history that Rick has never shared with his family. When Bird Person's memory version of Rick admits, "I need you, BP," it's a confession that the real Rick could never make aloud. This glimpse into their past shows that Bird Person has witnessed Rick at his lowest points and highest achievements, offering a perspective on Rick that no other character possesses. The genuine way Rick speaks to Bird Person in this mental landscape, without his usual sarcasm and deflection, suggests that this friendship may be the closest Rick comes to authentic connection. Bird Person's stoic, literal nature serves as the perfect counterpoint to Rick's chaotic deceptiveness. Where Rick uses language to obscure truth, Bird Person speaks directly. Where Rick employs elaborate schemes, Bird Person takes straightforward action. This fundamental difference might explain why their friendship has endured. Bird Person can see through Rick's defense mechanisms in ways that others can't, while still accepting him despite his flaws. Their friendship doesn't require Rick to maintain the facade of cynical genius that he presents to the rest of the universe. The depths of Rick's loyalty become most apparent in his willingness to risk himself for Bird Person. When Operation Phoenix fails to fully restore his friend, Rick doesn't abandon the effort but instead takes the extraordinary risk of entering Bird Person's damaged mind. This action could potentially trap Rick forever or destroy his own consciousness, yet he proceeds without hesitation. For someone who constantly calculates risks and benefits, this uncharacteristic willingness to gamble everything reveals the true value Rick places on this friendship, regardless of what he might claim. What Bird Person knows about Rick remains largely mysterious to viewers, but certain moments suggest he possesses critical insights into Rick's past that even the Smith family doesn't have access to. Bird Person has witnessed the events that shaped Rick into who he is today, including his transformation from revolutionary idealist to nihilistic scientist. This shared history gives Bird Person a unique ability to understand the contradictions in Rick's character. The man who claims nothing matters while fighting passionately for certain causes, who dismisses friendship while risking everything to save a friend. Particularly noteworthy is how Bird Person's perspective on Rick differs from others. While the Smith family typically reacts to Rick with a mixture of awe, fear, and resentment, Bird Person treats him with a steady equality. He neither worships Rick's genius nor condemns his selfishness, but instead recognizes both as aspects of a complex individual. This balanced view may explain why Rick maintains this friendship despite his professed disdain for emotional connections. With Bird Person, Rick is neither hero nor villain, but simply himself, with all his contradictions acknowledged. Beyond the rare bonds of friendship Rick forms, one episode fundamentally reshapes the show's DNA in ways that permanently alter both characters and audience. Have you ever wondered what separates early Rick and Morty from everything that followed? It's a single catastrophic mistake, a desperate escape, and the sound of two shovels digging graves in a quiet backyard. All while a haunting song plays and a traumatized teenager realizes the universe is far more broken than he ever imagined. In Rick Potion number 9, what begins as a seemingly typical adventure quickly spirals into something much darker. The episode starts innocuously enough, with Morty asking Rick for a love potion to use at a school dance. Wanting to impress his crush Jessica, Morty convinces a reluctant Rick to create a concoction that will make her attracted to him. The potion works, a bit too well. Due to an unforeseen complication with the flu virus going around, the potion mutates and spreads globally, causing the entire population, except blood relatives, to become obsessively attracted to Morty. Rick's attempts to fix the situation only make things worse. His antidote transforms everyone into horrific Cronenberg monsters, named after the body horror director. It's a catastrophic failure that leaves the entire planet uninhabitable and mutated beyond recognition. But rather than spend time trying to solve this seemingly impossible problem, Rick makes a startling decision. They'll simply abandon this reality altogether. What's most chilling about this moment isn't the devastation they've caused, but Rick's casual attitude toward it. He explains to Morty that they'll jump to a nearly identical reality where Rick solved the Cronenberg problem, but then both he and Morty died in an unrelated accident immediately afterward. All they need to do is take their dead counterparts' places and continue as if nothing happened. The casualness with which Rick proposes this solution reveals a disturbing moral calculus. It's easier to abandon a broken reality than fix your mistakes when you have infinite realities to choose from. For Morty, this moment is transformative. The psychological impact of burying his own corpse is devastating. As they dig graves in the backyard, Morty's facial expression shifts from shock to a kind of numb acceptance. Rick, meanwhile, continues explaining the mechanics of reality hopping, as if discussing the weather. "Try not to think about it," he advises Morty, underscoring how normalized this type of extreme solution has become for him. This scene in the backyard, with Mazzy Star's "Look on Down from the Bridge" playing as they silently dig, represents perhaps the most profound shift in Morty's understanding of reality. He's not just burying a body, he's burying his former worldview. Every concept he had about identity, continuity, and consequence is dismantled in those few minutes. He's learning that in Rick's multiverse, problems aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be escaped from. The philosophical implications of the multiverse perspective are profound. If infinite realities exist, what meaning can any single action have? Rick's approach suggests that mistakes don't matter when you can simply find a reality where those mistakes didn't happen or were already fixed. This perspective allows Rick to absolve himself of responsibility on a cosmic scale. Why face consequences when you can just jump to a reality where those consequences don't exist? This episode establishes a pattern that recurs throughout the series: Rick's tendency to escape rather than confront. When problems become too complex or emotionally demanding, his instinct is to find a way out rather than a way through. His multiverse perspective provides the perfect rationalization for this behavior. After all, if everything happens somewhere in the infinite multiverse, what's the point of struggling to fix any particular reality? The impact on Morty is equally significant. From this point forward, he carries the knowledge that he's not in his original reality, that his current family isn't his original family, and that somewhere there's a world filled with monsters that he helped create. References to this event appear in later episodes, sometimes subtly and sometimes explicitly, showing how it continues to haunt him. The song "Mazzy Star" is used again in a later episode, instantly triggering that same feeling of existential dread in both characters and viewers. This event fundamentally changes Morty's character arc. Before Rick Potion number 9, Morty was naive and relatively innocent, questioning Rick's methods but ultimately trusting in his grandfather's guidance. After the episode, Morty becomes more cynical, more aware of the true stakes of their adventures. He's had his entire concept of reality torn to shreds and rebuilt on shakier foundations. He begins to understand that Rick's cavalier attitude toward existence isn't just a personality quirk. It's a coping mechanism for dealing with the overwhelming implications of the multiverse. For Rick, this episode reinforces his pattern of moral compromise. The ease with which he decides to abandon their reality suggests he's done this before. His comfort with the process implies that this isn't the first time he's replaced himself in a timeline. This raises questions about Rick's history that the show explores in later seasons. How many times has he done this? Is the Rick we follow even the original Rick C-137? The episode plants seeds of doubt about Rick's identity that continue to grow throughout the series. The true horror of Rick Potion Sorcerer 9 isn't the monsters or the apocalypse. It's the realization that in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, individual actions can seem meaningless. This is the philosophical quandary at the heart of Rick's character. If everything happens somewhere, does anything matter anywhere? Rick's solution suggests his answer is no, but his continued attachment to this particular Morty contradicts that nihilism. Option 3 best captures Rick's fundamental character contradiction. Let's explore this further. While Rick preaches that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, his behavior tells a completely different story. This philosophical contradiction isn't just an interesting quirk, it's the core of Rick's character. The man who built his entire worldview around the meaninglessness of existence consistently acts as though specific people and relationships matter tremendously to him. In A Rick Convenient Mort, we get direct insight into this contradiction. The episode's narrator points out how Rick's nihilistic philosophy suggests individual experiences and relationships are insignificant within the vast multiverse. According to this perspective, Rick should be able to abandon his family at any moment without a second thought. After all, in a universe with infinite possibilities, what difference does one family make? Yet time and again, Rick's actions tell a different story entirely. What's particularly fascinating is how Rick uses cynicism as a deliberate defense mechanism. Rather than simply being pessimistic by nature, Rick actively employs cynical statements to create distance between himself and others. He constructs elaborate verbal barriers, insisting that attachments are meaningless and that caring about others is foolish in an infinite cosmos. This carefully calculated approach serves one primary purpose: to shield himself from emotional vulnerability. By constantly proclaiming his detachment, Rick attempts to protect himself from the pain that comes with genuine connection. Yet this facade crumbles in moments of crisis. When his family is genuinely threatened, Rick's true priorities emerge with startling clarity. In the Season 6 premiere, we see Rick's reaction to the potential loss of his family when faced with Rick Prime's return. His response isn't the casual indifference his philosophy would dictate. It's intense concern and immediate action. These crisis moments expose the truth behind Rick's carefully constructed persona, revealing that beneath his cynical exterior lies a man deeply invested in the well-being of his chosen family. Perhaps most telling is Rick's choice to remain with the Smith family despite having literally infinite options across the multiverse. Rick has the technology and knowledge to live anywhere he wants, with anyone he wants, in any reality he chooses. Yet he consistently returns to this specific family, in this specific reality. For someone who claims attachments are meaningless, this behavioral pattern suggests a profound contradiction at the heart of his character. Something about this particular family provides Rick with an emotional anchoring he needs, even if he can't admit it to himself or others. The evidence of Rick's genuine care appears in subtle moments throughout the series. We frequently see flashes of pride when his family members demonstrate competence or growth. Though these moments are often quickly undercut with sarcasm or dismissal, they reveal Rick's authentic investment in his family's development. These brief glimpses behind the curtain of cynicism suggest that Rick values his family far more than his philosophical pronouncements would indicate. What makes this contradiction so compelling is that Rick seems at least partially aware of it. His cynical statements often come immediately after moments where he's shown genuine care, as if he's trying to convince himself as much as others that he doesn't care. This pattern suggests an internal struggle. Rick knows that admitting attachment means acknowledging vulnerability, yet he can't quite stop himself from forming meaningful bonds. The narrator in A Rick Convenient Mort draws a fascinating parallel between Rick's contradictory nature and Morty's emotional experience with Plantina. While discussing Morty's connection, they note that his relationship wasn't meaningless. It's something that's going to change the way he looks at the world, the way he approaches his life and love and his own future. This insight applies equally to Rick's relationships. Despite his protests, his connections with family members fundamentally change him in ways that contradict his nihilistic worldview. What's particularly noteworthy about the show's approach to this contradiction is how the writers allow actions to speak louder than words. Rather than having characters directly confront Rick about his hypocrisy, the series lets viewers observe the disconnect between Rick's stated philosophy and his behavior. This subtlety makes the contradiction more powerful, as it emerges organically through character development rather than explicit commentary. The show's creators further enhance this exploration by occasionally dropping the comedic shield that typically protects Rick from too much emotional exposure. The episode A Rick Convenient Mort stands out because, as the source material notes, the entire final few sequences are almost devoid of comedy. These rare moments without humor allow Rick's contradictory nature to emerge more clearly, highlighting the genuine emotional stakes beneath his cynical exterior. This contradiction reveals a profound truth about Rick. His cynicism functions primarily as emotional armor. By maintaining the philosophy that nothing matters, Rick attempts to protect himself from the pain of potential loss. If he acknowledges that he genuinely cares about his family, he must also face the possibility of losing them, a vulnerability too threatening for someone who has already experienced profound loss. Option 2 captures the profound contradiction at the heart of Rick's character. While his cynicism functions as armor against emotional pain, there's something deeper driving his behavior: the unbearable weight of his intelligence itself. Rick's genius isn't just a tool he uses to manipulate the world. It's a prison from which he can never escape. Rick Sanchez exists in a unique state of cognitive isolation. His mind allows him to perceive realities that remain hidden to nearly everyone else in the multiverse. This extraordinary perspective grants him godlike powers but simultaneously denies him the comfort of ignorance that most beings enjoy. Most people live within the boundaries of a single reality, finding meaning in the small moments and connections of their limited existence. They fall in love, pursue careers, and raise families without questioning the fundamental purpose of it all. Their mental limitations become a blessing, allowing them to construct meaningful narratives within their narrow slice of existence. For Rick, these comforting illusions are impossible. His genius forces him to see the multiverse as it truly is. An infinite expanse of possibilities where everything that can happen does happen, rendering individual choices essentially meaningless. This awareness creates a paradoxical burden where Rick intellectually understands the pointlessness of everything while emotionally craving the very meaning his intelligence tells him doesn't exist. We can see this contradiction play out in episodes like Rick Potion Number 9, where he casually abandons an entire reality after catastrophically transforming its population. His ability to simply jump to another timeline after destroying his own world demonstrates both his power and his prison. He can escape any consequence except the knowledge that none of it ultimately matters. This awareness manifests as a constant state of frustration for Rick. He's perpetually caught between knowing too much and desiring the comfort of knowing less. While everyone around him can immerse themselves in the drama of daily life, Rick remains painfully aware of the cosmic stage on which these insignificant scenes play out. It's like watching actors become emotionally invested in a play while simultaneously seeing the backstage machinery, reading the script in advance, and knowing the theater will eventually be demolished. Rick can never truly suspend his disbelief in the way others can naturally do. Perhaps this explains why Rick seems to envy those with simpler minds. Jerry's intellectual limitations allow him to find contentment in basic achievements and straightforward pleasures. Morty, despite growing more cynical through his adventures with Rick, still maintains the capacity for wonder and emotional investment that Rick has largely lost. Even Beth, brilliant in her own right, chooses the comforting narrative of family life over the boundless but meaningless freedom Rick represents. Each family member, in their own way, demonstrates the happiness possible within a limited perspective. Happiness Rick's genius permanently denies him. This cognitive burden explains Rick's pattern of using science to address external problems while neglecting his internal struggles. He can create portal guns, clone bodies, and bend the laws of physics, yet he cannot engineer a solution to his own existential despair. When faced with emotional challenges, Rick consistently turns to technological quick fixes rather than psychological processing. His intelligence becomes both sword and shield, powerful enough to solve any external problem but ineffective against the real enemy, his own awareness. Rick's relationships with other intelligent beings further illustrate this dynamic. He often avoids sustained contact with minds approaching his level. His interactions with other Ricks at the Citadel are characterized by contempt and conflict rather than camaraderie. His friendship with Bird Person remains one of his few enduring connections precisely because Bird Person offers something Rick's intelligence cannot: straightforward emotional wisdom without the crushing awareness of cosmic meaninglessness. Unity, as a collective consciousness, came closest to understanding Rick completely, which explains both his attachment to her and the devastating impact of her departure. The tragedy of Rick's intelligence is that it simultaneously elevates him above ordinary existence while preventing him from finding satisfaction within it. He possesses the power to create or destroy worlds, but lacks the ability to feel at home in any of them. This explains his constant movement across the multiverse. He's not searching for adventure so much as fleeing from the inescapable awareness that follows him everywhere. Each new reality offers the brief illusion of novelty before his genius strips away the mystery, leaving only the familiar emptiness behind. Rick's frequent attempts to escape his own mind through substance abuse and reckless adventures represent desperate measures to quiet his relentless intellect. His alcoholism serves as both anesthetic and distraction, temporarily dulling the sharp edges of his awareness. The elaborate adventures he constructs aren't merely about scientific curiosity or personal gain. Their attempts to create sufficient external chaos to momentarily drown out the internal chaos of his thoughts. When Rick throws himself into mortal danger or pursues increasingly extreme experiences, he's seeking brief moments where immediate survival concerns overshadow existential ones. The ultimate paradox of Rick's genius is that it makes him the most powerful being in the multiverse while simultaneously making him one of its most profoundly suffering inhabitants. He can bend reality to his will, but cannot bend his own mind toward happiness. He can access infinite worlds, but cannot find peace in any of them. He understands everything except how to be content with understanding less. His intelligence isolates him from others, prevents genuine connection, and denies him the comforting illusions that make existence bearable for simpler minds. Option 3 captures something profound about Rick's relationship with alcohol. In a universe where Rick can create or solve virtually any problem, his flask represents the one solution he applies consistently across all realities. Have you ever noticed that across all dimensions and throughout every adventure, Rick's flask remains as much a part of him as his lab coat or his portal gun? This isn't just a stylistic choice by the show's creators. It's a deliberate character trait that speaks volumes about how Rick processes his existence. The flask appears in virtually every episode, dimension, and situation, becoming an extension of Rick himself. Whether he's battling intergalactic threats or having dinner with the family, the flask is always within reach, suggesting that his need for alcohol transcends mere habit and has become fundamental to his functioning. What's particularly revealing is how Rick's drinking patterns fluctuate in response to emotional triggers. When faced with emotionally charged situations, confrontations about his past, tensions with family members, or moments when his worldview is challenged, Rick's drinking noticeably intensifies. We can track this pattern across multiple episodes where Rick reaches for his flask more frequently during conversations that push him toward vulnerability. Interestingly, the opposite also proves true. When Rick is deeply engaged in meaningful scientific work or fully absorbed in a purpose-driven mission, his drinking often decreases. This inverse relationship between purpose and alcohol consumption suggests that Rick's drinking serves as a substitute for meaning rather than a random addiction. The physical manifestations of Rick's alcoholism are portrayed with surprising realism for an animated series. The show doesn't shy away from showing slurred speech, impaired coordination, and the erratic behavior that accompanies his intoxication. More subtly, the animation often depicts the slight tremor in Rick's hands when he's been without a drink for too long, a detail that speaks to his physical dependence. These visual cues aren't played merely for laughs, but serve as consistent reminders of the toll his drinking takes on him physically. The belching that has become one of Rick's trademark characteristics isn't just a comedic device, it's a constant reminder of his perpetual inebriation. Looking closer at specific episodes reveals how deliberately Rick uses alcohol as an emotional shield. After particularly traumatic experiences or when confronted with painful memories, Rick's first response is almost always to take a drink. This pattern suggests that alcohol serves as his primary tool for avoiding emotional processing, a liquid barrier between his consciousness and his pain. Rather than addressing trauma or working through difficult feelings, Rick chooses to blur the edges of his awareness, creating distance between himself and anything that might force genuine introspection. The Smith family's response to Rick's drinking provides another layer of insight into its impact. Their reactions typically range from resigned acceptance to occasional concern, but rarely outright intervention. This dynamic reveals how Rick's alcoholism has become normalized within the family structure, creating an emotional distance that prevents genuine connection. Summer and Morty occasionally make passing comments about his drinking, but these observations are usually deflected with Rick's characteristic defensiveness or humor. Beth's response is perhaps most telling. Her reluctance to confront her father's drinking mirrors her desperation to maintain his presence in her life, regardless of the condition he's in. The rare moments when Rick is shown sober stand in stark contrast to his usual persona. In these glimpses of sobriety, we often see a different side of Rick, sometimes more vulnerable, occasionally more focused, but always distinctly changed from his typical demeanor. These brief windows into sober Rick suggest that his alcoholism serves as more than mere addiction. It functions as an integral part of the persona he's constructed. Without alcohol as a buffer, Rick appears less equipped to maintain the emotional walls that define his character, allowing glimpses of the man beneath the cynical exterior. The connection between Rick's scientific brilliance and his need for alcohol reveals a particularly tragic aspect of his character. His mind operates at a level that few can comprehend, processing the multiverse's infinite complexity with remarkable clarity. This heightened awareness becomes both gift and curse, allowing him to solve seemingly impossible problems while simultaneously forcing him to confront the meaninglessness of existence. Alcohol serves as the dimmer switch for a mind that never stops running, offering temporary relief from the weight of knowing too much. For Rick, drinking isn't just about numbing pain. It's about slowing down a consciousness that processes reality at an overwhelming rate. By examining this relationship between Rick's intellect and his alcoholism, we can understand his drinking as a form of self-administered anesthesia for a mind that cannot escape its own awareness. When Rick speaks of the universe's inherent meaninglessness, he isn't engaging in abstract philosophy. He's describing his lived experience. His alcohol consumption represents his desperate attempt to function within a reality that his genius has already deconstructed. The flask becomes both symptom and solution, evidence of his existential burden and his chosen method for managing it. Beyond the flask and beneath the bravado lies a truth about Rick that only becomes visible when you place him alongside infinite versions of himself. The Citadel of Ricks isn't just a location in the show. It's a mirror reflecting something our Rick desperately tries to destroy every time he sees it. The Citadel of Ricks functions as a society comprised entirely of Ricks and Mortys from countless dimensions, each slightly different yet fundamentally similar. This massive interdimensional metropolis serves as the perfect backdrop to understand what makes our Rick C-137 unique within the vast spectrum of possible Ricks. Unlike most scientific tools in the show, the Citadel doesn't just measure Rick's intelligence or capabilities, it measures his humanity by contrast. What's immediately striking about Rick C-137's relationship with the Citadel is the intensity of his hatred toward it. This isn't just annoyance or indifference. It's a visceral, consuming loathing that drives him to repeatedly attempt to destroy it. When we consider that the Citadel is essentially a community of himself, this hatred takes on a much deeper significance. Rick isn't just rejecting an institution. He's rejecting aspects of himself reflected in other Ricks. It's self-loathing elevated to a cosmic scale, with Rick confronting his own traits magnified across thousands of alternate versions. The hierarchical structure within the Citadel reveals something crucial about how Ricks perceive themselves and each other. While the exact details of this hierarchy aren't fully fleshed out, we can observe that Rick C-137 operates completely outside its established power structures. His independence and refusal to conform to the Citadel's authority highlights his unique position among his counterparts. The other Ricks acknowledge this too, often treating him with a mixture of fear and respect that suggests they recognize something exceptional about him, even if they can't articulate what makes him different. The Ricklantis Mix-Up episode offers an extraordinary window into the variations possible within the character of Rick Sanchez. We see Ricks working as factory workers, law enforcement officers, politicians, and even teachers. Despite these surface-level differences in occupation and status, certain core traits remain consistent: their intelligence, their sardonic wit, their tendency toward isolation, and their general disdain for authority, even when they are the authority. These commonalities across infinite variations suggest that these traits are fundamental to Rick's character, the bedrock upon which all versions are built. One of the most revealing elements of the Citadel comes in the form of advertising rather than policy. The Simple Rick commercials featured in the Citadel manufacture wafers flavored with the brain chemicals of a Rick experiencing pure happiness through simple family connections. These commercials inadvertently reveal what may be the deepest desire of all Ricks: not scientific achievement or cosmic dominance, but basic human connection and familial love. This manufactured reality that's literally consumed by other Ricks suggests that beneath their cynical exteriors, all Ricks harbor a longing for the emotional fulfillment they typically deny themselves. Evil Morty's perspective on Ricks adds another critical dimension to our understanding. From his position, Ricks are inherently selfish, manipulative, and destructive forces in the multiverse. His assessment is particularly valuable because it comes from someone who has observed Ricks from a position of proximity but without identifying with them. When Evil Morty declares his intention to escape the central finite curve, the artificially limited section of the multiverse where Ricks are the smartest beings, he's rejecting not just Rick's authority, but the fundamental premise of Rick's identity. His critique suggests that Rick's genius may be less exceptional than Rick believes when viewed against the true infinity of possibilities. Rick C-137's repeated decisions to attack and destroy the Citadel reveal perhaps the most telling aspect of his self-perception. He doesn't just avoid the community of his alternates. He actively works to eliminate it. These aren't impulsive acts but calculated decisions that require significant effort and risk. Each attack can be interpreted as Rick attempting to eradicate the mirror that forces him to confront himself. By destroying the Citadel, he's symbolically rejecting the common traits he shares with other Ricks while asserting his individuality through violence. What ultimately distinguishes Rick C-137 from his countless alternates isn't his intelligence or scientific prowess. These appear relatively consistent across most versions. Instead, it's his capacity for genuine attachment and emotional growth. Despite his attempts to deny it, our Rick has formed bonds with his family that transcend mere convenience. He has demonstrated loyalty to friends like Bird Person that contradicts his stated philosophy. He has shown moments of sacrifice that suggest a moral compass absent in many other Ricks. These qualities don't make him less of a Rick. They make him more complex, more human, and ultimately more interesting than his counterparts. The relationship between Rick C-137 and the Smith family takes on new significance when viewed through the lens of the Citadel. His decision to remain with this particular family, despite having infinite families to choose from across the multiverse, reveals a capacity for attachment that many other Ricks either lack or suppress more successfully. The fact that he continues to return to them, despite claiming they mean nothing to him, exposes the contradiction at the heart of his character. This isn't just hypocrisy, it's evidence of emotional growth happening beneath his conscious awareness. The contradiction at the center of Rick's character becomes most striking when we watch him repeatedly return to the Smith family despite having the literal universe, or rather, infinite universes, at his fingertips. This is the man who could live in a dimension made entirely of beautiful women, establish himself as a god king on a primitive planet, or settle into the most advanced civilization imaginable. Yet time and again, he chooses to return to a suburban garage in a relatively mundane reality. It's like watching someone with unlimited vacation options repeatedly booking the same mediocre hotel. There must be something drawing him back that overrides all other considerations. When Rick disappears from the family, whether for adventures or following conflicts, his eventual return speaks volumes about what he truly needs. The pattern is unmistakable. Rick leaves, sometimes dramatically declaring he's gone for good, only to reappear when the family faces danger or during moments of quiet reconciliation. These returns are rarely accompanied by grand explanations or apologies. Instead, they happen with a casualness that suggests Rick is trying to convince himself, as much as others, that his departure was meaningless and his return insignificant. But the consistency of this cycle reveals a deeper truth he refuses to acknowledge. The relationship between Rick and Beth offers perhaps the most compelling explanation for his continued presence. Their dynamic is haunted by the ghost of his long absence during her childhood. Rick's current choice to stay with this specific Beth, despite having infinite Beths across the multiverse, suggests an attempt to make amends for past abandonment. When Beth shows even the slightest appreciation for his presence or hints that she might want him to leave, Rick's reactions are immediate and revealing. Behind his casual dismissals, we glimpse a man desperate for redemption, but unwilling to admit he needs it. Their relationship exists in a strange limbo. Beth craving the approval of a father who wasn't there, Rick seeking forgiveness he can't bring himself to ask for. Each member of the Smith family fulfills a specific emotional need for Rick, creating a support system he pretends not to want. Morty has evolved from a mere shield into a moral compass and surrogate son, challenging Rick's cynicism with occasional innocence and optimism. Summer provides a kind of intellectual kinship and growing capability that allows Rick to feel pride without the complication of direct parenthood. Even Jerry, despite being the constant target of Rick's mockery, serves a vital purpose. He's the perfect foil, the embodiment of everything Rick claims to despise but secretly envies for his untroubled acceptance of a simple life. Together, they create a psychological ecosystem that supports Rick's damaged psyche while allowing him to maintain the fiction of independence. We've seen countless moments where Rick could have permanently walked away from the Smith family but chose not to. After major arguments, when his presence puts them in danger, or when other dimensions offer him everything he claims to want – power, freedom, scientific resources – Rick still orbits back to this particular family. Even when he tries to replace them with more compliant versions, the replacements never satisfy whatever need the originals fulfill. This suggests something far deeper than convenience keeps him tethered to them. It's notable that when Rick does find excuses to leave, they're rarely about pursuing happiness elsewhere. They're almost always about running from emotional vulnerability or avoiding consequences. Rick's behavior when separated from the family is equally telling. His independence quickly degenerates into self-destruction, excessive substance abuse, or manic pursuit of distractions. Away from the stabilizing presence of the Smiths, Rick spirals. The family provides what Rick's intellect alone cannot, a framework within which his existence has meaning beyond pure nihilism. They anchor him to humanity in a way that prevents his complete dissolution into cynicism. Rick may mock Jerry for being a simple man defined by his family role, but Rick himself has become defined by his relationship to the Smiths, whether he admits it or not. So why does Rick stay? The evidence suggests it's not mere convenience, as he frequently introduces inconveniences into his own life to remain with them. It's not strictly love in the conventional sense, as he continues to deny the significance of emotional attachment. Rather, Rick stays because the Smith family provides him with something he desperately needs but cannot acknowledge: emotional grounding in a universe he perceives as meaningless chaos. They give him a constant against which to measure himself, a reason to return from the void, and most importantly, people who see him as more than just the smartest being in the universe. For a man who can access infinite realities, having a place where he is known, expected, and even needed represents a precious form of stability. Rick's dimensional fluidity makes most connections disposable in theory, but his consistent return to this family suggests they've become his definition of home. Not a physical place, but a set of relationships he can't replicate elsewhere, despite infinite possibilities. The irony is that while Rick could theoretically find a reality with a perfect family, he keeps choosing this imperfect one, suggesting their specific flaws and complications are somehow essential to what he needs from them. Rick's repeated choice to stay with the Smith family reveals the fundamental contradiction in his character: a man who preaches detachment while desperately seeking connection, who mocks stability while craving it, who flees from vulnerability while needing it. His genius allows him to understand the meaninglessness of existence, but not how to live with that knowledge. The Smith family doesn't solve this existential dilemma, but they make it bearable by providing Rick with emotional anchoring he can't admit to wanting, but clearly cannot live without. What if the entire multiverse was created by one man's grief? Tonight, we're exploring how a single moment forever changed Rick Sanchez and potentially sparked the creation of everything we know in Rick and Morty's universe. At the center of Rick's complex psychology lies a tragedy so profound that it seemingly shattered not just his heart, but reality itself. Throughout the series, we've been given glimpses of a memory that haunts Rick: the death of his wife Diane and daughter Beth. This moment first appears during Rick's interrogation by the Galactic Federation in the Season 3 premiere. In what appears to be a flashback, we see a younger Rick working on early portal technology when another Rick arrives, offering to share the secret formula. When our Rick refuses, this alternate Rick drops a bomb that kills Diane and Beth while Rick watches helplessly. The scene is brutal and visceral, a moment of absolute helplessness for a man defined by his control over everything. But here's where things get complicated. Immediately after showing us this memory, Rick confesses that it was completely fabricated, a false origin story designed to trick his captors. This creates the first major question in Rick's personal history. If this memory isn't real, then what actually happened to his original family? The show deliberately keeps these details vague, creating a mystery at the core of Rick's character that drives much of his behavior. The brilliance of the show's writing is that even after Rick dismisses the memory as fake, his actions throughout the series suggest some version of this tragedy actually occurred. We see this in his difficulty forming attachments, his instantaneous rage when family is threatened, and his occasional moments of vulnerability that peek through his hardened exterior. Rick C-137 behaves distinctly differently from other Ricks we encounter, suggesting his path diverged from theirs due to some unique traumatic experience. Season 5's finale finally provided confirmation that Rick's original Beth did indeed die, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. This revelation transforms our understanding of Rick's decades-long quest across the multiverse. It wasn't random adventuring or scientific curiosity that first drove him to develop his portal technology. It was grief, rage, and a desperate need for either escape or vengeance. The timing of Rick's creation of the portal gun becomes particularly significant when viewed through this lens. In multiple timelines and flashbacks, the development of this technology coincides directly with his family tragedy. This suggests that Rick's greatest scientific achievement wasn't born from pure intellectual pursuit, but from emotional devastation. The portal gun wasn't just an invention. It was Rick's response to unbearable loss, a tool that would allow him to either find the Rick responsible for his pain or escape to realities where versions of his family still lived. This connection between loss and creation mirrors a pattern we see in many great inventors and artists throughout history. Breakthrough innovation often emerges from profound personal suffering. For Rick, the multiverse became both his escape and his prison. He gained the ability to access infinite realities, but lost the ability to feel that any single reality truly mattered. After all, if there are infinite Beths and Dianes, why should he care about any particular version? Yet paradoxically, it's precisely because he lost his original family that he can never fully embrace this philosophy. Rick's nihilism, his frequent insistence that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, stems directly from this central tragedy. It's not just a philosophical position, it's a coping mechanism. If nothing matters, then his failure to protect his family doesn't matter. If everything is replaceable, then the pain of irreplaceable loss can be numbed. Yet we consistently see cracks in this nihilistic armor, moments where Rick shows he does care deeply despite his claims to the contrary. What makes this aspect of Rick's character so compelling is that we're never given explicit confirmation of exactly how his original Beth and Diane died. The ambiguity forces us to piece together clues from Rick's behavior, creating a mystery that mirrors Rick's own fragmented memories and emotional processing. Just as Rick seems unable to fully confront what happened, the audience is kept at a similar distance from the definitive truth. The portal gun itself becomes a physical manifestation of Rick's emotional state, a device that allows constant motion without progress, endless escape without resolution. Each new adventure, each new dimension, serves as another distraction from the grief he refuses to process. The green glow of the portal represents not just scientific achievement, but emotional avoidance on a cosmic scale. Perhaps most telling is Rick's treatment of the Beth in the dimension where he currently resides. His relationship with her carries the weight of guilt and unresolved grief. He abandoned her as a child, yet returned to her as an adult, suggesting he's both drawn to and repelled by this replacement for his daughter. This ambivalence extends to his entire adoptive family, creating the push-pull dynamic that drives much of the show's emotional tension. Rick's memory of how his family died might indeed be fabricated, not to trick others, but to protect himself. The human mind often creates protective barriers around traumatic memories, reconstructing them in ways that make them bearable. For Rick, attributing his family's death to another Rick creates an external target for his rage, someone to hunt across the multiverse rather than facing potential guilt over his own role in their fate. It gives purpose to his pain in a way that random tragedy never could. This brings us to the central question that haunts both Rick and the viewers. What really happened to Rick's original Beth and Diane that broke him so completely? While the show has not provided a definitive answer, the evidence suggests their deaths were real, even if the circumstances differ from Rick's memory. Whether they died due to another Rick's actions, as collateral damage in Rick's scientific pursuits, or through some entirely different tragedy, the impact on Rick remains the same. A wound so deep that even with access to infinite realities, he cannot heal it. This foundational trauma echoes through every relationship Rick forms. His reluctance to bond with Morty, his complicated feelings toward Beth, his contempt for Jerry, and his hot and cold treatment of Summer all reflect aspects of his unresolved grief. Even his friendships with characters like Bird Person carry the shadow of his loss, as Rick remains unable to fully commit to these connections, always keeping one foot in the portal, ready to escape if emotional intimacy becomes too threatening. The genius of Rick's character is that his greatest strength, his scientific brilliance, emerged from his greatest weakness, his inability to process grief. The very intellect that allows him to traverse dimensions and bend reality becomes a tool to avoid confronting the emotional reality of his loss. In this way, Rick's story becomes a profound exploration of how people cope with grief and how even the most brilliant minds can be fundamentally broken by the experience of loss. Ever wonder why Rick drinks so heavily that he literally drools green spittle while explaining quantum physics? Those missing 20 years between losing his family and showing up at Beth's doorstep weren't just lost time. They were the crucible that forged the Rick we know, transforming him from a grieving husband with purpose into the universe's most wanted and loneliest genius. The Rick Sanchez who eventually stumbled into his adult daughter's life is dramatically different from the man who disappeared 2 decades earlier. To understand this transformation, we need to piece together the fragmentary glimpses the show offers about these lost years. The Rick who appears at Beth's door is already fully formed in his cynicism, scientific brilliance, and psychological damage. But these traits developed gradually through what must have been the most turbulent period of his life. What we know for certain is that during these missing decades, Rick wasn't aimlessly wandering the cosmos. He was methodically hunting through the multiverse with a singular purpose, tracking down the Rick who murdered his family. This wasn't just a quest for vengeance. It was an obsession that consumed him entirely. In the season's 6th premiere, we learned that Rick Prime, the Rick responsible for killing Diane and Beth, became the driving force behind Rick's multiverse, spanning Rampage. This wasn't random dimension hopping. It was a calculated hunt, with Rick systematically tracking and eliminating countless versions of himself in his desperate search for the one Rick he truly wanted to destroy. The scale of Rick's vendetta was so massive that it prompted the remaining Ricks across the multiverse to band together for their own protection, leading to the creation of the Citadel of Ricks. This detail is particularly revealing. Rick C-137 was so relentless in his pursuit that an entire organization of alternate versions of himself was formed specifically to counter his threat. His raw determination and capacity for violence during this period must have been truly terrifying, establishing his reputation as the most dangerous Rick in existence. Yet, this wasn't Rick's only activity during these 20 years. The series shows us through scattered flashbacks that Rick also played a key role in the resistance against the Galactic Federation. Fighting alongside allies like Bird Person and Squanchy, Rick became part of a revolutionary movement that believed in fighting for freedom across the galaxy. These resistance years are particularly significant because they show us a version of Rick who hadn't yet completely embraced nihilism, a man who could still believe in causes greater than himself and form meaningful connections with others. This younger, resistance fighter, Rick, represents a transitional phase between the family man we glimpse in his memories and the utterly cynical figure who eventually returns to Beth. His partnership with Bird Person particularly shows that Rick was still capable of genuine friendship and even idealism during this period. The fact that Rick fought for a cause suggests that his extreme cynicism wasn't an immediate response to his family's death, but rather developed gradually through continued disappointments, betrayals, and losses over these 2 decades. Rick's scientific development during this period is equally significant. While already brilliant before losing his family, Rick's technological capabilities expanded exponentially during his time. Away, the portal gun, already a remarkable invention, was refined and improved. He developed weapons capable of defeating entire civilizations, mastered genetic manipulation, and created devices that could alter reality itself. This accelerated scientific growth suggests Rick was channeling all his emotional energy into his intellect, using technical problems to avoid facing emotional ones. It's likely during these years that Rick began his relationship with alcohol as well. What may have started as occasional drinking to numb the pain gradually evolved into the constant intoxication we see in the series. His flask became as much a part of him as his portal gun, a portable shield against feeling too deeply. The timing of when his drinking problem developed is never explicitly stated, but it makes sense that it would emerge during these decades of isolation and violence. One of the most profound transformations during this period was Rick's growing detachment from others. The man who once loved his wife and daughter enough to break when he lost them gradually became someone who viewed attachments as dangerous vulnerabilities. Through repeated loss and betrayal, Rick learned a devastating lesson. In a multiverse of infinite possibilities, caring too deeply about specific individuals only leads to pain. This hardening of Rick's emotional core during these 20 years explains why, when he finally returns to Beth, he keeps her and the entire Smith family at an emotional distance. What's particularly haunting about these lost decades is the isolation Rick experienced. Cut off from family and constantly on the move, Rick existed in a state of perpetual transience. Even his relationships with allies like Bird Person had an impermanent quality to them. Partnerships formed in the heat of revolutionary action, rather than stable, enduring connections. This prolonged isolation would have profoundly affected Rick's psyche, reinforcing his belief that he was fundamentally alone in the universe. Throughout all this hunting, fighting, and dimension hopping, Rick was simultaneously evading both the Citadel of Ricks and the Galactic Federation. He became the most wanted man in multiple realities, forcing him to develop survival skills and paranoia that would become defining characteristics. His ability to instantly assess threats, prepare for betrayal, and maintain escape routes became second nature during these years on the run. The picture that emerges is of a man being hollowed out by grief and rage, replacing emotional connections with scientific brilliance and revolution. Each year away from family life pushed Rick further from the person he once was and closer to the nihilistic genius we meet in the series. His hunt for Rick Prime gave him purpose but also consumed him, teaching him that the multiverse was fundamentally hostile and that safety could only be found in emotional detachment and superior intelligence. When Rick finally reappears at Beth's door, he brings with him all the accumulated trauma, cynicism, and brilliance of these missing decades. The alcoholism, the casual disregard for others, the scientific capabilities, and the profound loneliness weren't traits he always possessed. They were forged during 20 years of hunting, fighting, and running. Understanding this transformation is key to understanding why Rick behaves as he does with the Smith family, always keeping one foot out the door even as he gradually forms new attachments. Those decades of isolation didn't just change Rick, they separated him from every other version of himself across the multiverse. When the series introduces us to the Citadel of Ricks, we discover something fascinating. Despite infinite versions of Rick existing across countless realities, ours is distinctly labeled the Rickest Rick. But what exactly does that mean, and why does it matter? The Citadel itself stands as a testament to how different C-137 truly is from his counterparts. Picture an entire society built by and for Ricks, a sprawling metropolis where thousands of versions of the same brilliant, cynical scientist have established government, infrastructure, and an entire economic system. Every Rick we see at the Citadel has made the choice to conform in some way, to accept being one Rick among many. They've surrendered a piece of their individuality in exchange for safety, convenience, or power. Yet our Rick refused this bargain entirely. This rejection goes beyond mere stubbornness. When C-137 encounters the Citadel, we witness something like existential horror in his reaction. It's not just that he disagrees with their politics or methods. It's that he fundamentally rejects what he sees reflected back at him when surrounded by alternate versions of himself. Other Ricks have found ways to make peace with their identity, either by embracing community with their counterparts or by carving out specialized roles within the Citadel hierarchy. C-137 wants nothing to do with this mirror house of his own image. His eventual destruction of the Citadel speaks volumes about this rejection. Where most people might be fascinated to meet their alternate selves, C-137 responds with disgust and violence. It's as though seeing aspects of himself amplified and repeated across countless versions triggers something deeply uncomfortable. Perhaps because each Rick represents a path he could have taken, choices he could have made, compromises he refused. Each Rick is a reminder of parts of himself he'd rather destroy than acknowledge. Even more revealing is how C-137 treats family connections compared to other Ricks. The vast majority of Ricks across the multiverse follow a similar pattern. They abandon their original families but eventually settle into relationships with alternate versions of their daughters and grandsons. They find some form of stability, however dysfunctional. C-137 stands apart in having avoided such attachments altogether for decades, showing a deeper level of trauma or a more profound rejection of conventional family structures. While other Ricks casually replaced their families, C-137 refused any substitutes for what he lost. This difference becomes particularly apparent in his relationship with Morty. The Smith family garage contains countless hints about previous Mortys that Rick has worked with, abandoned, or lost. Yet his connection with the current Morty shows a complexity other Rick-Morty pairs rarely exhibit. Most Ricks view their Mortys as tools, walking cloaking devices whose brainwaves mask their own. Some even mass-produce Mortys like commodities. C-137's relationship with Morty oscillates between exploitation and genuine care, in ways that make it uniquely layered. He might use Morty as carelessly as any Rick, but he also shows moments of genuine vulnerability and protection that others don't. The most striking difference, however, might be C-137's capacity for violence. All Ricks are dangerous. Their intelligence and technology make them formidable in any reality. But C-137's willingness to resort to extreme measures exceeds that of most other Ricks, hinting at a darker past and more intense experiences during his missing years. He doesn't just defeat enemies, he obliterates them. He doesn't just fight back, he scorches Earth. This exceptional capacity for destruction suggests that whatever molded C-137 during his hunt for Rick Prime hardened him in ways other Ricks never experienced. His scientific achievements also separate him from the pack. All Ricks are geniuses, but C-137's innovations consistently surpass those of his counterparts. When captured by the Citadel, other Ricks express a mixture of admiration and fear at his capabilities. There's a suggestion that his suffering and emotional turmoil have paradoxically driven his genius to greater heights, as though the depth of his pain correlates with the heights of his intellectual breakthroughs. His portal gun technology, his weapon systems, his ability to manipulate time and space, all seem slightly more advanced than what other Ricks have achieved. This raises an interesting possibility. What if suffering is the key ingredient that makes C-137 the Rickest Rick? What if his refusal to accept comfort, his rejection of easy answers, his willingness to stare into the void longer than any other Rick is precisely what defines him? Other Ricks found ways to dull their pain. Through the community of the Citadel, through replacement families, through embracing complete nihilism. C-137 does none of these things completely. He remains in the uncomfortable middle ground, aware of the meaninglessness of existence, yet unable to fully surrender his capacity for connection. This contradiction explains why he's simultaneously the most dangerous and most vulnerable Rick in the multiverse. He holds on to the pain that other Ricks have found ways to escape. He refuses the comfort that other Ricks accept. He maintains a perspective that most Ricks find intolerable, that nothing matters, and yet some things still hurt. This internal struggle makes him unpredictable in ways other Ricks aren't. They follow patterns. He breaks them. They accept limitations. He transcends them. They settle. He never stops moving. The title Rickest Rick isn't a compliment or an achievement. It's a diagnosis. It means C-137 embodies both the best and worst qualities of Rick Sanchez to their fullest extent. He's the most brilliant, the most capable, the most independent Rick, but also the most damaged, the most volatile, the most haunted. Where other Ricks have found some form of equilibrium, C-137 remains in flux, caught between nihilism and sentiment, between isolation and connection, between genius and self-destruction. This tension manifests most clearly in how C-137 treats Morty. Other Ricks use their Mortys, but C-137 both uses and protects his Morty. He belittles him constantly but defends him fiercely. He endangers him regularly but saves him reliably. This isn't simple inconsistency. It's the manifestation of C-137's core conflict. Part of him wants to care about nothing and no one, as that would be easier. Another part can't help caring despite himself. The result is a relationship that shifts unpredictably between exploitation and something approaching love. Perhaps the most telling evidence of C-137's uniqueness is how other Ricks react to him. They fear him. Even surrounded by infinite versions of himself, all with the same fundamental intelligence and many of the same memories and experiences, C-137 is regarded as exceptionally dangerous. The Citadel wasn't formed merely for community. It was created as protection against C-137's rampage through the multiverse. An entire society of Ricks felt they needed to band together against one man, themselves. For a man who insists nothing matters in an infinite universe, Rick C-137 makes some curiously inconsistent choices when it comes to Morty. This supposedly expendable sidekick, initially just walking camouflage for Rick's brainwaves, somehow became the one constant in a life defined by cosmic detachment. The contradiction raises an uncomfortable question. Does the smartest man in the universe need his grandson more than he's willing to admit? Rick's initial relationship with Morty appeared purely transactional. He needed a human shield whose brainwaves could mask his own from various threats. Convenient that his daughter had produced a teenage son with just the right brainwave pattern. Early adventures show Rick treating Morty as little more than a tool, dragging him from school, exposing him to trauma, and dismissing his emotional reactions as weaknesses to overcome. The dynamic seemed clear. Rick was the user, Morty the used. But something shifted as their adventures continued. Despite having access to literally infinite Mortys across the multiverse, a fact established when we see the Citadel's Morty replacement program and the infamous Morty market, Rick shows unusual commitment to this specific Morty. Consider how easily Rick abandoned his original dimension after the Cronenberg disaster, yet maintained his attachment to the same Morty. In a universe where everyone is theoretically replaceable, Rick's behavior suggests he sees something irreplaceable in his current grandson. The concept of Morty waves provides a fascinating window into their relationship beyond mere utility. These brainwaves that mask Rick's genius serve as a perfect metaphor for their emotional dynamic. Morty's presence doesn't just shield Rick physically, it provides essential emotional stability. His innocence and moral compass counterbalance Rick's crushing cynicism, creating a symbiotic relationship deeper than either openly acknowledges. Without this counterweight, Rick might collapse under the full weight of his own intellect and the harsh realities he's witnessed across dimensions. What makes this relationship truly perplexing is how directly it contradicts Rick's stated life philosophy. The man who repeatedly insists nothing matters in an infinite universe, who can literally replace family members with alternate versions whenever convenient, has repeatedly risked his own life to protect Morty. We've seen Rick place himself in mortal danger, sacrifice advantages, and even surrender to enemies when Morty's safety was at stake. These actions reveal the central paradox of Rick's character: his intellectual rejection of meaning versus his emotional need for connection. As Morty gains experience through their adventures, we see him adopting elements of Rick's problem-solving approach, becoming more calculating, more willing to embrace morally ambiguous solutions, and developing his own scientific curiosity. This evolution raises profound questions about Rick's motives. Does Rick recognize elements of his younger self in Morty? Is he unconsciously training a successor? The pattern suggests Rick is simultaneously proud of Morty's growing capabilities, while conflicted about the loss of innocence he's causing, mirroring his own journey from idealistic young scientist to hardened interdimensional cynic. The most revealing aspect of their relationship emerges in quiet moments between adventures. Rick's rare displays of vulnerability almost always occur with Morty as the sole witness. Despite maintaining emotional walls against the entire multiverse, Rick occasionally allows Morty glimpses of his true self, his regrets, his loneliness, his capacity for love. These moments typically end with Rick retreating behind humor or cruelty, but their frequency increases as seasons progress, suggesting Morty has penetrated Rick's defenses in ways even Rick might not fully recognize. This complicated bond between Rick and Morty serves as an emotional echo of Rick's relationship with his original Beth. Having lost his chance at fatherhood with his biological daughter, Rick unconsciously approaches Morty as both grandson and surrogate child. The relationship allows Rick a second chance at family, not just as a grandfather, but as a father figure, albeit a deeply flawed one. Rick's simultaneous impulses to protect Morty from harm while deliberately exposing him to the universe's dangers reflect his struggle between emotional attachment and his belief that true protection means preparing someone for reality's harshness. Rick's behavior toward Morty reveals his deepest psychological patterns. He projects both his lost innocence and his failures as a father onto Morty, creating a relationship where he's simultaneously trying to shield Morty from following his path, while preparing him for the same harsh universe that broke Rick himself. This contradiction explains why Rick veers between cruel dismissiveness and fierce protection. He's fighting his own internal battle through his relationship with Morty. The moments when Rick sacrifices for Morty are particularly telling. When facing threats that could be escaped through portal technology, or by simply abandoning Morty to save himself, Rick consistently chooses loyalty over self-preservation. These choices directly contradict his supposed belief that all relationships are meaningless in an infinite universe. Rick's willingness to endure pain, imprisonment, or death for Morty's sake suggests that, despite his philosophical nihilism, Rick remains emotionally human in ways he refuses to verbally acknowledge. Morty's growth throughout their adventures forces Rick to confront aspects of himself he'd rather avoid. As Morty gains confidence and begins challenging Rick's authority, their relationship evolves from master-assistant to something closer to genuine partnership. Morty's increased willingness to call out Rick's selfishness or cruelty forces Rick into moments of self-reflection he typically avoids through alcohol or adventure. These confrontations create opportunities for vulnerability that Rick simultaneously craves and fears. Connections that threaten his carefully constructed emotional isolation while satisfying his deeper need for meaningful bonds. The evolution of their relationship follows a clear pattern. Rick initially treats Morty as disposable, gradually reveals his dependence on their connection, then retreats when that vulnerability becomes too uncomfortable. This cycle repeats across seasons, with each iteration revealing more of Rick's emotional needs. The pattern suggests Rick is caught between his intellectual understanding of cosmic meaninglessness and his emotional requirement for connection, a paradox he cannot resolve because doing so would require admitting his entire nihilistic worldview is partially a defense mechanism against pain. This symbiotic relationship provides what both characters deeply need. For Morty, Rick offers adventure, knowledge, and a pathway to confidence beyond his insecure adolescent self. For Rick, Morty provides emotional grounding, moral challenge, and perhaps most importantly, a reason to remain connected to humanity, despite knowing how insignificant humanity is in the cosmic scale. Their relationship forces Rick to confront the contradiction at his core. If nothing truly matters in an infinite multiverse, why does he consistently choose this specific Morty's well-being over convenience, advantage, or even his own safety? Beneath Rick's scientific genius and interdimensional swagger lies another relationship that defines his existence, the one he maintains with his flask. While we've examined his complex dynamics with family members, this ever-present companion reveals vulnerabilities that even Rick himself refuses to acknowledge. That metal container isn't just a prop or casual character quirk. It's a precisely calibrated emotional management system designed to keep the universe's most dangerous mind functioning, despite carrying unimaginable trauma. Rick's relationship with alcohol transcends simple addiction. It appears in nearly every episode regardless of context, whether he's attending family dinner, fighting intergalactic threats, or floating through space. This consistency speaks volumes about its importance to his psychological functioning. What initially registers as a comedic character trait gradually reveals itself as something far more deliberate and calculated. The flask isn't just a drinking vessel, it's life support for a man perpetually on the edge of emotional collapse. When we watch closely, a pattern emerges in Rick's drinking behavior. The moments he reaches most urgently for his flask directly correlate with situations that threaten his emotional barriers. Family gatherings that risk genuine connection, references to his past mistakes, or rare instances where he feels cornered into vulnerability. These are precisely when the flask appears most prominently. This timing isn't coincidental. Rick employs alcohol with surgical precision, using it to regulate his emotional state when memories or connections threaten to overwhelm his carefully constructed walls. The animation itself provides visual cues about Rick's internal state through varying levels of intoxication. Those bloodshot eyes, occasional slurring, and unsteady movements aren't random. They're calculated indicators of his emotional temperature at any given moment. The more threatened his emotional defenses, the more pronounced his physical symptoms become. This visual language helps us read Rick's true feelings even when his words say something entirely different. Perhaps most revealing is how Rick weaponizes his drunkenness as plausible deniability. Those rare moments when genuine affection slips through, a protective gesture toward Morty, a vulnerable confession, or an emotional outburst, are immediately attributed to intoxication. "I'm drunk, Morty," becomes his standard defense when caught caring too deeply. This strategic attribution allows him to express authentic emotions without acknowledging their legitimacy. The next morning, anything too revealing can be dismissed as the alcohol talking, protecting his carefully maintained image of detachment. This chemical buffer serves multiple functions beyond emotional regulation. From a purely physical perspective, the alcohol likely helps manage symptoms of what would clinically qualify as severe post-traumatic stress. The constant danger, violence, and loss Rick experiences would crush an ordinary mind. The alcohol numbs not just emotional pain, but likely helps quiet the hypervigilance and anxiety that would otherwise render him non-functional. It's self-prescribed medication for a condition he refuses to acknowledge. Notice how Rick's drinking accelerates dramatically during periods of isolation, particularly when separated from his family. Those solo adventures often feature him at his most intoxicated, suggesting the alcohol helps manage not just existing trauma, but the acute pain of current isolation. For someone who insists attachments are meaningless in an infinite multiverse, he seems remarkably dependent on chemical assistance when facing solitude. This pattern reveals attachment issues he verbally denies but behaviorally confirms. The rare moments we witness Rick completely sober present a striking contrast worth examining. These scenes typically showcase his most rational, calculating, and scientifically brilliant moments, but also his most emotionally detached states. Without alcohol's moderating effect, Rick becomes almost machine-like, approaching problems with cold efficiency but minimal human connection. This duality suggests the alcohol doesn't just suppress emotions. It paradoxically allows him to access them in controlled doses. Sobriety brings clarity, but at the cost of connection. What's particularly fascinating is how Rick's relationship with alcohol mirrors his relationship with the multiverse itself. Both serve as escape mechanisms, ways to avoid confronting the singular, painful reality of his existence. Just as he can portal away from uncomfortable situations, he can drink away from uncomfortable feelings. Both technologies, the portal gun and the flask, represent Rick's fundamental approach to emotional pain. Escape rather than confrontation, avoidance rather than processing. The flask represents something far more profound than simple chemical dependence. It's the physical manifestation of Rick's refusal to process grief. The constant presence of alcohol creates a precisely calibrated buffer zone that keeps emotions at bay while allowing just enough feeling to maintain basic human connection. This delicate balance explains why Rick remains functional, despite experiencing traumas that would destroy most minds. The alcohol doesn't just numb him, it titrates his emotional experience to a manageable level. Examining Rick's relationship with his flask reveals the fundamental paradox at his core. The smartest being in the multiverse, capable of manipulating reality itself, remains utterly dependent on the most primitive and human of coping mechanisms. A man who could synthesize any substance imaginable, who understands the neurochemistry of emotion at a molecular level, chooses ordinary alcohol as his companion. This contradiction speaks to a profound truth. That intellectual understanding of pain doesn't equate to emotional processing of it. The few times Rick has lost access to alcohol, we've glimpsed the raw emotional state that lurks beneath the surface. These moments of forced sobriety often coincide with his most desperate and erratic behavior, suggesting the alcohol doesn't just manage his emotions. It prevents complete psychological collapse. Without this chemical barrier, the full weight of his experiences would likely overwhelm even his extraordinary mind. This dependency reveals just how fragile the supposedly strongest being in the universe actually is. Rick's drinking isn't simply a character quirk or comedic device. It's a crucial component of his survival strategy. The seemingly trivial flask represents his entire approach to existence. Maintain just enough emotional distance to function without completely disconnecting from what makes life worth living. This chemical buffer between Rick and his emotions allows him to participate in family life while protecting himself from its most painful aspects. It's the compromise solution of a brilliant but broken man who cannot fully embrace or reject his humanity. That chemical buffer Rick maintains between himself and genuine connection wasn't always necessary. Before the flask became his constant companion, Rick Sanchez was part of something bigger than himself. A rebellion alongside Bird Person, Squanchy, and others against the Galactic Federation. The scattered glimpses we get of his revolutionary past show someone almost unrecognizable from the cynical loner we know today. A Rick who formed genuine bonds, fought for ideals, and hadn't yet decided the multiverse was meaningless. When we look at the younger Rick in those rebellion flashbacks, we see someone fundamentally different in how he relates to others. His expressions are more open, his body language less guarded. The animation itself subtly shifts during these scenes, with younger Rick drawn with slightly softer lines and more expressive eyes. This visual distinction reinforces that we're seeing a different version of Rick. Not just physically younger, but emotionally accessible in ways present-day Rick rarely allows himself to be. The rebellion years represent the last time Rick genuinely believed in something beyond himself. This wasn't just Rick fighting against authority for the sake of chaos. It was Rick actively working toward a vision of freedom alongside others who shared that vision. The Federation represented everything Rick opposed: rigid control, suppression of scientific advancement, and bureaucratic restriction of individual liberty. In these battles, we see Rick's genius deployed not just for personal gain or random adventure, but for a collective cause he deemed worthy of sacrifice. What's particularly revealing about this period is how Rick operated as part of a team. Present-day Rick typically dismisses the need for allies, claiming he can outthink and outfight any challenge alone. But Rebellion-era Rick coordinated attacks with Bird Person, planned strategies with Squanchy, and apparently formed bonds strong enough that decades later, these figures still consider him a friend despite his current antisocial tendencies. This willingness to coordinate and cooperate stands in stark contrast to the Rick who now rejects collaboration, except when absolutely necessary. The song, For the Damaged Coda, that plays at Bird Person's wedding, carries emotional significance that Rick would never openly acknowledge. The moment illustrates how Rick's emotional connections from this period haven't disappeared entirely. They've just been buried beneath layers of defensive cynicism. When Rick thought Bird Person had been killed, his reaction was raw grief, followed by determined efforts to revive his friend. For someone who claims that relationships are meaningless in an infinite multiverse where everyone is replaceable, Rick's loyalty to specific versions of his friends from the rebellion reveals a profound contradiction in his stated philosophy. Perhaps the most significant difference between Rebellion-era Rick and present-day Rick is his capacity for idealism. Young Rick believed the universe could be improved through collective action. He wasn't yet convinced that nothing matters. The question this raises is crucial. What happened between these revolutionary years and Rick's current state that convinced him resistance is ultimately pointless? The rebellion's failure likely plays a key role in this transformation. After investing years fighting for freedom only to see the Federation maintain its grip on power, Rick may have concluded that organized resistance against cosmic indifference is as futile as fighting gravity. This philosophical shift appears to have been gradual rather than sudden. We see moments in the flashbacks where Rick begins questioning the rebellion's methods or chances of success. There's a scene where he argues with Bird Person about tactical decisions, already showing signs of the cynicism that would eventually consume him. The seeds of his current worldview were being planted even as he fought alongside others for a better universe. This timeline suggests Rick's nihilism wasn't a sudden reaction to a single catastrophic event, but a slow corrosion of hope through repeated disappointments. Rick's transition from revolutionary to isolated nihilist parallels his increasing reliance on alcohol. In the Rebellion flashbacks, we occasionally see Rick drinking, but it's social and celebratory rather than constant and medicinal. The flask hasn't yet become an extension of his arm. This evolution suggests that as Rick lost faith in collective action and withdrew from meaningful connections, he simultaneously developed chemical dependencies to manage the emotional aftermath of that withdrawal. His isolation and his addiction developed in tandem, each reinforcing the other. What makes these glimpses of Rick's past so compelling is how they challenge his carefully constructed persona. Present day. Rick insists he's always been a lone wolf, that he naturally rejects attachment and cooperation. But the historical evidence contradicts this claim. Rick didn't start as a nihilistic loner. He became one through experience, which means his current state isn't immutable. The Rick who formed meaningful bonds with Bird Person and others still exists beneath the layers of trauma and defensive cynicism. This understanding transforms how we perceive his current behavior from inherent nature to adaptive response. The Rebellion years also provide crucial context for Rick's complicated relationship with authority. His hatred for the Galactic Federation isn't abstract, it's personal, rooted in years of direct conflict. Similarly, his rejection of the Citadel of Ricks isn't just philosophical disagreement, but a visceral reaction to seeing versions of himself organized into the very kind of bureaucratic structure he fought against. Rick's anti-authoritarianism isn't random contrarianism. It's informed by specific experiences during his revolutionary period that taught him to distrust organized power of any kind. Perhaps most poignantly, the Rebellion era shows Rick's last attempt at building something rather than just tearing things down. Current Rick primarily defines himself through opposition and deconstruction. He's against systems, against illusions, against attachment. But younger Rick fought for freedom, for a specific vision of how the universe could be better. This constructive aspect of his personality has been almost entirely suppressed in his current incarnation, where he rarely builds anything that isn't designed to destroy something else or facilitate escape. This transformation from revolutionary to nihilist raises questions about whether Rick's current philosophy is actually a form of surrender. Has Rick genuinely concluded that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse? Or has he simply given up after too many losses? The fact that he once believed in causes greater than himself suggests his nihilism might be less a philosophical conclusion than a psychological defense mechanism. A way to avoid the pain of caring too deeply about things he might lose. If nothing matters, then nothing can hurt you. If everything is meaningless, then failure carries no weight. The suspicious timing of Rick's nihilistic declarations has never been coincidental. When examining the exact moments he proclaims nothing matters, a clear pattern emerges. These philosophical pronouncements intensify precisely when he's confronted with emotional vulnerability or personal failure. This correlation suggests his cosmic indifference might be less about universal truth and more about emotional self-preservation. The multiverse's most brilliant mind has constructed an elaborate philosophical fortress that serves dual purposes, intellectually accommodating the vastness of infinite realities while simultaneously shielding him from the pain of personal attachment. Rick's infamous philosophy, "Nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's gonna die," isn't just a throwaway line. It represents his fundamental approach to existence, a perspective that allows him to navigate an infinite cosmos without being crushed by its weight. On the surface, it sounds like textbook nihilism, a complete rejection of meaning in a universe too vast to care about individual lives. But the true nature of Rick's nihilism becomes apparent through the contradictions that consistently emerge between his stated beliefs and his actual behaviors. Consider how selectively Rick applies his philosophy. When faced with difficult emotions or confronted with personal failures, his nihilism becomes his first line of defense. The universe's meaninglessness becomes a convenient explanation for why he shouldn't have to deal with the messy reality of relationships or responsibilities. Yet in other contexts, particularly when pursuing revenge or protecting specific family members, Rick's actions reveal deeply held values that shouldn't exist within a truly nihilistic framework. What's fascinating about Rick's perspective is that it's not entirely inaccurate. His scientific understanding of the multiverse gives him insight few others possess. Having witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall across dimensions, he's seen firsthand how temporary and ultimately insignificant most achievements and concerns are on a cosmic scale. The infinite nature of the multiverse does theoretically render individual actions meaningless. With infinite realities, every possible outcome occurs somewhere, making choice itself somewhat irrelevant. This cosmic awareness acts as a double-edged sword for Rick. When he fully embraces the idea that nothing matters, his creativity flourishes. Without the constraints of conventional morality or meaning, his scientific genius reaches its peak, allowing him to create technologies and solutions that break boundaries precisely because he doesn't recognize boundaries as meaningful in the first place. In these moments, nihilism becomes liberating rather than depressing, a perspective that frees him from limitations other scientists can't overcome. Yet, despite this apparent intellectual commitment to meaninglessness, Rick maintains surprisingly specific preferences throughout his adventures. He has favorite foods, music, and television shows. He develops unique relationships with specific versions of family members despite having access to infinite, identical versions across the multiverse. These preferences reveal an inconsistency in his philosophy. If truly nothing matters in an infinite universe, why would he care which ice cream flavor he consumes or which grandson accompanies him on adventures? More telling is Rick's anger toward other Ricks, particularly Rick Prime. His vendetta reveals a belief in meaningful distinctions between right and wrong actions. If everything were truly meaningless, the actions of Rick Prime would be no more significant than any other random event in the multiverse. Yet Rick pursues this specific target with singular focus, indicating he does believe some actions carry moral weight, despite his claims to the contrary. These contradictions suggest that Rick's nihilism may be more complicated than a simple philosophical conclusion. When we observe the moments when his nihilistic statements are most forceful, they typically follow emotional challenges or personal failures. The philosophy intensifies precisely when he's trying to distance himself from pain, suggesting it functions as an emotional buffer rather than a purely intellectual position. This pattern points to a more nuanced understanding of Rick's worldview. Rather than being either genuine philosophy or psychological defense, his nihilism appears to be both simultaneously. The scientific portion of Rick's mind has indeed reached the logical conclusion that in an infinite multiverse, individual actions and choices cannot have cosmic significance. This is an intellectually honest assessment based on his unparalleled understanding of reality's structure. However, the emotional part of Rick's psyche has weaponized this conclusion, transforming it into armor against further loss and grief. By insisting nothing matters, he protects himself from the vulnerability that comes with caring deeply about specific people or outcomes. If nothing has meaning, then failure carries no weight, and loss becomes merely a statistical inevitability rather than a personal tragedy. The Season 6 finale, Fear No Mort, perfectly illustrates this contradiction. Rick's primary motivation throughout multiple seasons has been revenge against Rick Prime, a goal that shouldn't matter in a truly meaningless universe. When he finally achieves this goal, he experiences an existential crisis because his purpose is suddenly upended. The episode demonstrates that Rick's emotional connections, particularly with Morty, drive him even when he refuses to acknowledge their importance. The final sequence conveys the same existential dread Morty experienced in Season 1, showing that even after achieving his ultimate goal, Rick remains caught between knowing nothing matters and feeling that some things definitely do. This philosophical contradiction at Rick's core explains why the smartest man in the universe remains unable to resolve his own internal conflicts. His intellect tells him one truth, while his emotions continuously push him toward another. He understands the meaninglessness of existence better than anyone, yet cannot fully surrender his capacity for connection and care. This tension creates the fascinating broken character we see, a genius trapped between cosmic awareness and human emotion. What makes Rick's situation particularly poignant is that he likely recognizes this contradiction within himself. His intelligence allows him to see the inconsistency between his stated philosophy and his actions. Yet he cannot resolve it because both aspects represent genuine parts of his experience. His nihilism is simultaneously his most honest intellectual assessment of reality and his most elaborate emotional defense mechanism. The paradox of Rick Sanchez isn't that he's wrong about the universe's meaninglessness. It's that he's right about the universe, but wrong about himself. The cosmos may indeed be indifferent to individual existence, but Rick himself is not. Despite every effort to embrace cosmic insignificance, he remains bound by the very human need for purpose and connection. This unresolvable tension forms the tragic core of his character, a man who understands everything about the universe except how to reconcile his knowledge with his need for meaning. For a man with access to infinite realities, Rick's dimensional selection criteria remains surprisingly narrow. The multiverse offers Rick endless variations of his family. Configurations where Jerry might be competent, Summer could be less self-absorbed, or Morty might possess greater intelligence. Yet amid this boundless array of possibilities, Rick gravitates toward a specific version of the Smith family that, objectively speaking, seems nowhere near optimal from his perspective. The multiverse in Rick and Morty isn't just a backdrop, it's the fundamental framework that drives the narrative possibilities of the show. This concept allows Rick to access countless versions of his family members across dimensions, each with their own unique characteristics and relationships. The multiverse serves as both Rick's playground and his emotional battlefield, providing him endless escape routes while simultaneously forcing him to confront the consequences of his choices. The Cronenberg incident stands as the most dramatic example of Rick's willingness to abandon an entire reality when things go irreparably wrong. When Rick's attempt to help Morty impress his crush resulted in the mutation of Earth's entire population, their solution wasn't to fix the problem. It was to find a dimension where that version of themselves had just died in an accident, allowing them to seamlessly replace them. This ability to find replacement dimensions fundamentally alters the stakes of existence itself. What's fascinating is how Rick compartmentalizes this knowledge. He understands that in theory, any family member could be swapped with an identical version from another dimension, yet he maintains specific attachments to particular versions. This contradiction reveals the tension at the heart of Rick's character. His intellectual understanding of cosmic interchangeability battles constantly with his emotional need for specific connections. The multiverse's endless array of family variations raises profound questions about identity and continuity. After the Cronenberg incident, Morty struggled with the knowledge that he had abandoned his original family and was essentially living someone else's life. For Rick, however, this kind of dimensional substitution appears routine, at least on the surface. His database of replacement dimensions suggests a level of planning that contradicts his claims of emotional detachment. Space Beth represents perhaps the most interesting case study in Rick's complex relationship with family across dimensions. Rather than simply choosing between two versions of his daughter, Rick created a scenario where both could exist simultaneously, one pursuing adventure across the cosmos, the other maintaining domestic life on Earth. This solution reveals Rick's reluctance to make definitive choices about family relationships, preferring instead to keep all options available. The displacement of the Smith family in Season 6 further complicates Rick's relationship with dimensional continuity. With the entire family now living in a reality not originally their own, the show explores how identity persists even when physical surroundings change. This shift forces both the characters and audience to reconsider what home means in a multiverse of infinite possibilities. Rick's consistent contempt for Jerry across dimensions represents one of the most stable elements of his character. Regardless of which Jerry he encounters, Rick's disdain remains constant, suggesting that Jerry represents something Rick fundamentally rejects or fears about himself. Perhaps Jerry's willing acceptance of mediocrity stands as an uncomfortable reminder of the ordinary human connections Rick both craves and rejects. The pattern becomes clear when we consider the full range of Rick's family experiences across dimensions. He's likely encountered versions where Beth became a renowned surgeon, where Summer leads interplanetary revolutions, where Morty possesses intelligence rivaling his own. Yet he chooses to stay with a family configuration that frequently frustrates and disappoints him. This preference cannot be explained by mere convenience. The invisible criteria guiding Rick's choice of family seems to involve a delicate balance of acceptance and challenge. He gravitates toward family members who accept his flaws without enabling his worst tendencies. The current Smith family has witnessed Rick at his most vulnerable moments, drunk, defeated, emotionally broken, yet they continue to make space for him in their lives. This acceptance appears to be something Rick values more than any optimization of family traits. What makes this particular family configuration worth staying with when Rick has access to literally infinite alternatives? The answer lies not in their perfection, but in their specific imperfections. This family has grown with Rick, adapted to his presence, and developed a dynamic that accommodates both his genius and his damage. More importantly, they've witnessed his vulnerabilities yet continue to accept him, a combination Rick likely found rarely in his dimensional travels. The Smith family's awareness of Rick's limitations distinguishes them from other potential family configurations. They know he's not a god, despite his technological capabilities. They've seen him fail, make mistakes, and reveal weaknesses. This knowledge creates a relationship based on reality rather than illusion, something Rick may find both terrifying and essential. Perhaps most significantly, this specific family has participated in Rick's history. They remember shared experiences that shaped their collective identity. The Cronenberg incident, adventures with the Citadel, confrontations with the Galactic Federation. These shared traumas and triumphs create bonds that transcend dimensional interchangeability. Memory becomes the currency of true connection in a universe where everything physical can be replaced. The paradox of Rick's family situation reflects the central contradiction of his character. He maintains that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, while simultaneously making choices that reveal deep attachment to specific people. His selection of this particular family configuration isn't random. It represents his compromise between emotional safety and genuine connection in a universe where everything is simultaneously meaningful and meaningless. Across countless dimensions, Rick has likely encountered versions of his family that would stroke his ego, enable his worst tendencies, or challenge him in ways this family doesn't. His choice to remain with this specific configuration reveals that somewhere beneath his nihilistic exterior, Rick desires authentic connection more than comfort or convenience. He seeks people who know him, truly know him, rather than idealized versions who might better serve his practical needs. Rick's journey across infinite families ultimately reveals that even in a multiverse of endless possibilities, the specific connections we form matter precisely because we choose them. Despite access to limitless alternatives, Rick keeps returning to the family that has witnessed his brokenness and accepted him anyway. In a reality where everything can be replaced, Rick's choice of family becomes one of the few genuine expressions of his buried humanity. Behind the genius of Rick Sanchez lies an architecture of emotional barriers so intricate they would impress even the most accomplished dimensional engineer. While Rick chooses to remain with a family that's witnessed his brokenness, he simultaneously maintains emotional walls so thick, not even the smartest man in the multiverse can dismantle them. His barriers aren't just character flaws, they're survival mechanisms protecting something far more fragile than we've been led to believe. The systematic way Rick prevents emotional intimacy isn't random or accidental. It's a carefully orchestrated defense strategy refined over decades. When we examine the pattern closely, we see that Rick doesn't just avoid emotional connections. He actively sabotages them with surgical precision whenever they approach a certain threshold of intimacy. This deliberate distancing isn't the temperamental reaction of a grumpy old scientist, but rather a calculated survival strategy. What's particularly fascinating is how Rick calibrates his emotional barriers depending on who's attempting to connect with him. With Beth, he maintains just enough warmth to sustain her hope without risking genuine vulnerability. With Summer, he keeps interactions focused on adventure and capability rather than feelings. And with Jerry, he manufactures contempt to ensure distance. Each relationship has its own carefully maintained boundary that Rick adjusts with meticulous attention. The moments when Rick's barriers temporarily fall reveal just how essential they are to his psychological stability. In these rare glimpses of vulnerability, we see a man so overwhelmed by his emotions that he can barely function. His reflexive withdrawal isn't just emotional stubbornness, it's psychological self-preservation. After these moments of exposure, Rick doesn't just change the subject. He often creates entire crises or adventures to distract from and overshadow the vulnerability, ensuring it gets buried beneath layers of chaos and movement. What makes these walls particularly fascinating is that Rick built them using the same brilliant mind that created interdimensional travel. The psychological architecture keeping others at bay is just as sophisticated as his technological innovations. Rick has essentially reverse-engineered human connection, understanding precisely how it forms and exactly where to place obstacles to prevent it from developing beyond his control. He's mapped the psychology of attachment as thoroughly as he's mapped the multiverse itself. The Mind Blower's room stands as a physical manifestation of Rick's refusal to process painful emotions. This collection of extracted memories isn't just a convenient plot device. It's a literal representation of Rick's approach to emotional processing. Rather than working through difficult feelings, he simply removes them from his consciousness entirely. This technological shortcut allows him to function without the burden of emotional growth, creating a pattern where the same mistakes can be repeated without the awareness they've happened before. We see Rick's elaborate avoidance strategies reach absurd proportions when faced with straightforward emotional conversations. He'll invent devices, create diversions, or engineer entire scenarios rather than engage in basic emotional dialogue. The energy invested in these evasions often far exceeds what a simple conversation would require, highlighting how threatening genuine connection feels to him. When Beth attempts to discuss their relationship, Rick might suddenly discover an interdimensional emergency requiring immediate attention, demonstrating how even the threat of emotional intimacy triggers his flight response. His relationship with Unity provided one of the clearest windows into Rick's awareness of his own toxic influence. During their brief reconnection, Unity briefly made Rick happy in a way we rarely see, yet their relationship ultimately revealed his destructive impact on others. Unity's letter explained she was leaving not because she didn't care for Rick, but because staying with him would destroy her. This awareness that his presence damages those he cares about adds another dimension to Rick's emotional barriers. They're partly constructed to protect others from himself. The aftermath of Unity's departure stands as the darkest illustration of the pain contained behind Rick's walls. His attempted suicide wasn't just a moment of despair. It was a glimpse into the abyss he carries within him at all times. The scene showed Rick methodically setting up a death that would appear accidental, suggesting this wasn't an impulsive act, but something he'd considered before. That this attempt followed a rare moment of genuine connection isn't coincidental. It reveals how threatening intimacy is to the careful balance Rick maintains. Beneath Rick's defenses lies trauma so severe that any breach in his emotional walls risks complete psychological collapse. His barriers aren't just keeping others out, they're keeping himself contained. The emotional pain from his past is so overwhelming that without these defenses, Rick likely couldn't function at all. His walls are load-bearing structures in his psychological architecture, and removing them without proper support would bring everything crashing down. This containment strategy creates a paradox at Rick's core. His scientific genius allows him to understand his psychological damage with perfect clarity, yet that same intellect prevents him from healing it. Rick can diagnose his own condition with precision that would impress the most skilled therapist, but his analytical approach to emotion keeps him trapped in patterns of avoidance rather than growth. He can map every neural pathway of his trauma, but remains unable to rewire them. What makes Rick's condition particularly tragic is that his self-awareness doesn't translate into change. He's capable of articulating exactly why he pushes people away and the precise mechanisms of his emotional dysfunction. Yet this knowledge doesn't help him overcome it. In some ways, his intellect makes healing harder. He can rationalize his defenses too effectively, creating logical justifications for emotional avoidance that sound convincing even to himself. The few times Rick encounters entities capable of challenging his defenses, like Unity, Dr. Wong, or even certain versions of Morty, we see a brief flicker of possibility before Rick reasserts control. These moments suggest healing isn't impossible, just terrifying. Rick approaches emotional vulnerability the way most people would approach certain death, as something to be avoided at all costs, regardless of potential benefits. Rick's emotional walls also serve as a form of temporal containment, preserving the past in a state of suspension rather than allowing it to be processed and integrated. By refusing to address his trauma, Rick essentially remains frozen at the moment of his greatest pain, carrying it forward through time unchanged rather than allowing it to evolve or diminish. This explains why decades-old wounds still determine his behavior. They remain as fresh as the day they were inflicted because they've never been properly exposed to the healing effects of time and processing. The true tragedy of Rick's condition isn't just his isolation, but the fact that his walls have become a prison rather than a protection. What began as a defensive measure has evolved into a constraint that limits his ability to experience life's most meaningful aspects. The barriers that once shielded him from unbearable pain now prevent him from feeling the full spectrum of human connection, creating a life that's safe but incomplete. Those emotional barriers that trap Rick in a prison of his own making might actually serve another purpose entirely, one that powers the engine of his relentless scientific pursuits. Every portal Rick opens, every godlike entity he confronts, every piece of technology he collects isn't just about adventure or proving his intelligence. It's all part of a pattern pointing to something he's desperately searching for across infinite realities. Rick's scientific innovations go far beyond what any being would need for simple survival or comfort. We're talking about a man who casually creates sentient robots to pass butter at breakfast, yet continues to refine increasingly complex portal technology decades after mastering interdimensional travel. There's clearly something driving this constant innovation, something beyond mere curiosity or the practical needs of his adventures. Looking at the technologies Rick repeatedly returns to, a pattern emerges. Time manipulation, reality alteration, consciousness transfer. These aren't random scientific interests. They're technologies that share a common thread: the ability to change, escape, or rewrite what's already happened. When Rick tinkers with these specific areas of research, he's not just exploring scientific frontiers. He's searching for ways to alter the very fabric of existence itself. The central finite curve is perhaps the most telling example of this pattern. Rick didn't just isolate dimensions where he happens to be the smartest being. He created a cosmic barrier that ensures he never experiences helplessness again. The curve isn't just about ego. It's a defense mechanism against ever feeling as powerless as he did during that defining moment of loss. By controlling which realities he can access, Rick ensures he'll always have the intellectual advantage to solve any problem he encounters. Or at least, that's what he tells himself. Watch how Rick interacts with the portal gun itself. Long after mastering the basic technology of interdimensional travel, he continues to refine and modify it. The gun isn't just a tool for random adventures, it's an instrument of searching. In quiet moments between episodes, we can imagine Rick alone in his garage, making minute adjustments to the device's calibration, perhaps hoping this next modification will finally lead him to what he's seeking across the cosmic expanse. Rick's encounters with godlike entities follow a similar pattern. From the time god in the time police dimension to the truth tortoise that knows all, Rick regularly seeks out and confronts beings with cosmic-level power. But rather than worshipping or avoiding these entities, Rick typically challenges them directly, defeats them, or steals their technology. It's as if he's systematically studying the foundational forces of reality itself, trying to understand, and ultimately control, the very powers that govern existence and loss. His weapon collection provides another clue. Rick doesn't just defeat enemies, he methodically catalogs and stores their technology. His secret arsenal contains weapons capable of reality manipulation, consciousness transfer, and dimensional control. This isn't the behavior of someone interested in self-defense or even conquest. It's the pattern of someone ensuring they'll never be vulnerable again. Someone preparing for every conceivable threat or opportunity the multiverse might present. Most revealing are the abandoned projects Rick periodically revisits. Unlike a scientist driven by mere curiosity who would move from discovery to discovery, Rick maintains a mental catalog of unfinished experiments. He returns to certain projects years later with renewed focus, suggesting these aren't random explorations but pieces of some larger puzzle he's trying to solve. The abandoned projects aren't truly abandoned. They're simply awaiting the missing components he hasn't yet discovered. When we examine these patterns collectively, a profound truth emerges about Rick's motivations. His scientific quest isn't really about science at all. It's a desperate search for either forgiveness or forgetfulness. Every portal he opens, every dimension he explores, every technological breakthrough he achieves is another attempt to fill the void left by his original family. He's searching for the one discovery that might finally bring peace to his fractured psyche. This explains why no scientific achievement ever truly satisfies Rick. He creates miraculous technologies daily, solves impossible problems before breakfast, and has mastered forces most beings can't comprehend, yet remains perpetually unsatisfied. That's because he's attempting to solve an emotional problem with technological solutions. No portal gun, no matter how advanced, can transport him away from his grief. No reality-altering device can truly change the emotional reality he carries within himself. We see this most clearly in moments when Rick achieves major scientific breakthroughs, only to immediately move on to the next project without celebration or satisfaction. These should be moments of triumph for a true scientist, yet Rick treats them as mere stepping stones towards some unseen goal. That's because each breakthrough is measured not by its scientific merit, but by its proximity to healing his emotional wounds. The irony is that Rick's genius ensures he'll never find what he's looking for through science alone. He's smart enough to create any reality he desires except the one thing he truly wants. A reality where his original loss never occurred or where that loss no longer hurts. His intellect allows him to understand this contradiction intellectually while remaining emotionally trapped within it. In some dimensions, Rick has actually found technological solutions to emotional problems. Memory erasers, clone families, simulated realities. He's created countless ways to potentially escape his pain. Yet he rejects these solutions for himself, perhaps understanding on some level that true redemption can't be manufactured or programmed. It must be earned through the very emotional process he's spent decades avoiding. Behind Rick's seemingly random scientific interests lies a single unspoken question. Is there a reality, somewhere in the infinite expanse of the multiverse, where redemption is possible? Not just a dimension where his family never died, but one where he can be forgiven, by others or by himself, for whatever role he played in their fate. Each scientific pursuit represents another attempt to answer this question, another path that might finally lead him home. This quest for redemption manifests in Rick's most personal inventions. His spaceship, which protects its passengers at all costs. His defense systems, which anticipate and neutralize threats before they materialize. Even his garage workshop itself, a space where he can control every variable and prevent any unexpected outcome. These aren't just cool sci-fi gadgets. They're expressions of his deepest desire, to create a world where he can protect what matters, something he failed to do once before. The ultimate tragedy of Rick's scientific pursuits is that the solution he seeks might be closer than he realizes. The void he's trying to fill through interdimensional exploration could potentially be addressed through the connections available in his current reality, with Beth, Morty, Summer, and even Jerry. Yet he continues searching across dimensions, perhaps because facing the emotional work of healing in his present reality is more terrifying than any alien monster he's ever encountered. For all his dimension-hopping abilities, Rick remains trapped in the most confining prison imaginable, his own pattern of emotional avoidance. Even though we've watched him face planet-destroying threats and cosmic horrors without blinking, there's something almost more terrifying about those rare moments when Rick's emotional walls momentarily crumble, revealing the wounded human being underneath all that cynicism. Throughout Rick and Morty's run, we've witnessed a man who recognizes his own psychological damage with stunning clarity, yet seems fundamentally unable to address it. His session with Dr. Wong in the Pickle Rick episode stands as perhaps the most profound example of this paradox. When confronted about his avoidance behaviors, Rick intellectually acknowledges the assessment but immediately rejects the emotional work required to change. "I don't respect therapy," he tells Dr. Wong, "because I'm a scientist. Because I invent, transform, create, and destroy for a living. And when I don't like something about the world, I change it." This moment perfectly encapsulates Rick's approach to his own trauma. He can diagnose it perfectly but refuses the process necessary to heal it. This cyclical pattern extends beyond therapy. When Rick opens up to Bird Person about his pain, we glimpse genuine vulnerability, but he quickly retreats to his established patterns of cynicism and detachment afterward. The same occurs following his heartfelt confession to a young Beth in the Season 6 premiere, a moment of profound honesty followed by a swift return to emotional barriers. It's as if Rick can only tolerate brief windows of vulnerability before the threat of sustained emotional exposure becomes overwhelming. What makes Rick's case particularly fascinating is how his genius actively works against his healing. Unlike most people who might lack awareness of their psychological patterns, Rick possesses hyper-awareness. He understands exactly what he's doing and why. This awareness, rather than empowering change, becomes another tool for rationalization. He can explain away his behavior with scientific precision, creating an intellectual shield against emotional growth. His intelligence becomes the very thing that keeps him locked in destructive cycles, allowing him to develop increasingly sophisticated justifications for avoiding the work of healing. We see this dynamic most clearly in Rick's relationship with Morty, which shows the most significant evolution across the series. What began as pure exploitation, literally using Morty as a human shield, has gradually transformed into something resembling genuine mentorship. This relationship represents Rick's greatest potential for growth, as it forces him to confront aspects of himself he'd rather avoid. When Morty challenges Rick's decisions or moral choices, we occasionally witness Rick reconsidering his position, brief moments that suggest capacity for change, though they rarely lead to sustained transformation. Rick's interactions with equals rather than subordinates offer additional insight into his capacity for emotional connection. His relationship with Unity, for instance, provided a rare glimpse of Rick engaging with someone he couldn't control or manipulate. Similarly, his interactions with Space Beth showed him relating to someone who mirrored his own capabilities and independence. These relationships, though short-lived, demonstrate that Rick can form meaningful bonds when the power dynamic is balanced. This suggests his emotional barriers aren't absolute. They're selective and contextual, activated most strongly in situations that threaten his established patterns of control. The most revealing moments in Rick's journey come when he acknowledges pain rather than deflecting it with humor or cynicism. These instances, though rare, produce his most genuine connections with others. When he attempts suicide following Unity's departure, we see the raw pain underneath his carefully maintained facade. When he sacrifices himself to save Morty or his family in various episodes, we witness the contradiction between his stated philosophy and his actual values. These moments suggest that beneath Rick's cynical exterior exists a capacity for genuine care and connection, one that he actively suppresses but can't entirely eliminate. This suppression points to the fundamental conflict at Rick's core. His genius allows him to understand the psychological mechanisms behind his behavior, but that same intelligence creates resistance to the vulnerability required for healing. For Rick, emotional exposure represents a threat potentially more dangerous than any alien creature he's encountered. He's developed sophisticated defenses to avoid confronting his wounds directly, preferring to process them through indirect means like adventure, substance abuse, or scientific innovation. Rick's emotional struggle raises a profound question about intelligence and healing. Does exceptional intelligence help or hinder psychological growth? In Rick's case, his genius appears to function as both his greatest obstacle and his only potential salvation. His problem-solving capabilities are unmatched across the multiverse, yet he consistently fails to apply these skills to his own emotional damage. This suggests that healing requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands emotional surrender, vulnerability, and acceptance of pain, qualities that Rick actively resists. The tragedy of Rick's character lies in this contradiction. He possesses the capacity to understand his condition with perfect clarity while simultaneously lacking the willingness to address it. His awareness becomes another form of suffering rather than a path to healing. He knows exactly what he needs to do but cannot bring himself to do it, creating a uniquely painful form of stasis. This makes Rick perhaps the most human character in the show, despite his superhuman intellect and capabilities. His emotional struggles reflect a universal resistance to confronting our deepest wounds. Yet, glimmers of hope emerge through Rick's journey. His gradual acceptance of Morty as more than a tool suggests capacity for growth. His moments of sacrifice for family members indicate values beyond his stated nihilism. His rare instances of vulnerability with figures like Bird Person demonstrate potential for authentic connection. These moments, though inconsistent, suggest that Rick's emotional barriers aren't impenetrable. They're permeable under specific circumstances. The question remains whether Rick can transform these momentary breakthroughs into lasting change. Can the man who revolutionized interdimensional travel revolutionize his own emotional landscape? The core tension of Rick's character centers on this possibility. His genius provides unparalleled tools for problem-solving, but healing requires something fundamentally different than invention or discovery. It demands acceptance rather than transformation, surrender rather than control. Rick's journey reflects our own struggles with emotional growth. While most viewers don't possess his genius or interdimensional technology, many share his resistance to confronting pain directly. His character resonates because he embodies the universal tendency to avoid emotional work through distraction, substance, or intellectualization. The difference is merely one of scale and sophistication. Rick's avoidance mechanisms are as advanced as his technology, but they serve the same fundamental purpose as our own. So as we wind down our exploration of Rick Sanchez tonight, what becomes clear is that beneath all his scientific brilliance lies a profound human truth. His journey shows us that grief isn't something that can be outrun or outsmarted, even with portal guns and infinite realities at your disposal. The irony of Rick's existence is that his extraordinary mind, capable of bending the laws of physics, remains trapped by emotions he refuses to process. Perhaps in this lies Rick's most relatable quality. His struggle to confront loss mirrors our own tendency to seek escape rather than healing. True healing requires acknowledging pain, not circumventing it through nihilism or scientific distraction.